Chapter 22. Thunder and the Trumpet. For till the thunder and the trumpet be, soul may divide from body, but not we, one from another. Algernon Charles Swinburne. Laus Veneris. Clockwork creatures clawed at Tessa out of black mists. Fire ran through her veins, and when she looked down, her skin was cracked and blistering, golden ichor running in sheets down her arms. She saw the endless fields of heaven, saw a sky constantly on fire with blaze that would have blinded any human. She saw silver clouds with edges like razors, and felt the icy emptiness that hollowed the hearts of angels. "Tessa!" It was Will. She would have known his speech anywhere. "Tessa, wake up! Wake up, Tessa, please!" She could hear the pain in his voice, and wanted to reach out for him, but as she lifted her arms, the flames rose and charred her fingers. Her hands turned to ash and blew away on the hot wind. Tessa tossed on her bed in a delirium of fever and nightmares. The sheets twisted around her were soaked with sweat, her hair plastered to her temples. Her skin, always pale, was near translucent, showing the mapping of veins beneath her skin, the shape of her bones. Her clockwork angel was at her throat. Every once in a while she would catch at it, and then cry out in a lost voice, as if the touch pained her. "She's in so much agony." Charlotte dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to Tessa's burning forehead. The girl made a soft protesting sound at the touch, but didn't move to bat Charlotte's hand away. Charlotte would have liked to think it was because the cool cloths were helping, but she knew it was more likely that Tessa was simply becoming too exhausted. "Isn't there anything more we can do?" "The angel's fire is leaving her body." Brother Enoch, standing at Charlotte's side, spoke in his eerie, omnidirectional whisper. "It will take the time it takes. She will be free of pain when it is gone." "But she will live." "She has survived thus far." The silent brother sounded grim. "The fire should have killed her. It would have killed any normal human. But she is part shadow hunter and part demon, and she was protected by the angel whose fire she drew on. It shielded her, even in those last moments, as it blazed up and burned away its own corporeal form." Charlotte could not help but remember the circular room under Kada Idris, Tessa stepping forward and transforming from girl into flame, blazing up like a column of fire, her hair turning into tendrils of sparks, the light of it blinding and terrifying. Crouched on the floor by Henry's body, Charlotte had wondered how even angels could burn like that and live. When the angel had left Tessa, she had collapsed, her clothes hanging in tatters and her skin covered in marks as if she had been scorched. Several shadow hunters had rushed to her side between the crumpling automatons, though it had been something of a blur to Charlotte. Scenes viewed through the wavering lens of her terror over Henry. Will lifting Tessa in his arms, the Magister's stronghold beginning to close itself up behind them, doors slamming closed as they raced through the corridors, Magnus's blue fire lighting them a path to escape. The creation of a second portal, more silent brothers waiting for them at the Institute, scarred hands and scarred faces, shutting out even Charlotte as they closed themselves in with Henry and Tessa. Will turning to Jem, his expression stricken. He had reached out for his parabatai. "James," he said, "you can find out what they're doing to her, if she'll live." But Brother Enoch had stepped between them. "His name is not James Carstairs," he had said. "It is Zachariah now." Will's look, the way he had lowered his hand. Let him speak for himself. But Jem had only turned and walked away from all of them, out of the Institute, Will watching him go in disbelief, and Charlotte had remembered the first time they had ever met. "Are you really dying?" "I am sorry." It was Will, still looking stunned and disbelieving, who had explained to them all, haltingly, Tessa's story, the function of the clockwork angel, the tale of the ill-fated Starkweathers, and the unorthodox manner of Tessa's conception. Aloysius had been right, Charlotte reflected. Tessa was his great-granddaughter, a descendant he would never know, for he had been slain in the council massacre. Charlotte couldn't stop herself from imagining what it must have been like when the doors of the council room had opened and the automatons had poured in. Councils were not required to be unarmed, but they were not prepared to fight. Nor had most Shadowhunters ever faced an automaton. Even to imagine the slaughter chilled her. She was overwhelmed by the enormity of the loss to the Shadowhunter world, though it would have been much greater had Tessa not made the sacrifice she did. All the automatons had fallen with Mortmain's death, even the ones in the council rooms, and the majority of the Shadowhunters had survived, though there had been heavy losses, including the consul. Part demon, and part Shadowhunter, Charlotte murmured now, gazing down at Tessa. What does that make her? Nephilim blood is dominant, a new kind of Shadowhunter. New is not always a bad thing, Charlotte. It was because of that Nephilim blood that they had gone so far as to try healing runes upon Tessa, but the runes had simply sunk into her skin and vanished, like words written in water. Charlotte reached out now to touch Tessa's collarbone, where the rune had been inked. Her skin was hot to the touch. Her clockwork angel, Charlotte observed. It has stopped its ticking. The angel's presence has left it. Ethereal is free, and Tessa unprotected. Though with the Magister dead, and as a Nephilim herself, she will likely be safe, as long as she does not attempt to transform herself into an angel a second time. It would certainly kill her. There are other dangers. We must face dangers, said Brother Enoch. It was the same cool, unruffled mental voice he had used when he had told her that though Henry would live, he would never walk again. On the bed, Tessa stirred, crying out in a dry voice. In her sleep, since the battle, she had called out names. She had called for Nate, and for our aunt, and for Charlotte. Jim, she whispered now, clutching fitfully at her coverlet. Charlotte turned away from Enoch as she reached for the cool cloth again and laid it across Tessa's forehead. She knew she should not ask, and yet... How is he, our Jem? Is he... adjusting to the Brotherhood? She felt Enoch's reproach. You know I cannot tell you that. He is no longer your Jem. He is Brother Zachariah now. You must forget him. Forget him? I cannot forget him, Charlotte said. He is not as your other brothers, Enoch, you know that. The rituals that make a silent brother are our deepest secrets. I'm not asking to know of your rituals, Charlotte said. Yet I know that most silent brothers sever their ties to their mortal lives before they enter the Brotherhood. But James could not do that. He still has that which tethers him to this world. She looked down at Tessa, her eyelids fluttering as she breathed harshly. It is a cord that ties each of them to each other, and unless it is dissolved properly, I fear it may harm them both. She is coming, my own, my sweet, were it ever so airy a tread. My heart would hear her and beat. Were it earth in an earthy bed, my dust would hear her and beat. Had I lain for a century dead, would start and tremble under her feet, and blossom in purple and red. Oh, for goodness sake, Henry said irritably, pushing up the ink-stained sleeves of his dressing gown. Can't you read something less depressing? Something with a good battle in it? It's Tennyson, said Will, sliding his feet off the ottoman near the fire. They were in the drawing room, Henry's chair pulled up near the fire, a sketchbook open in his lap. He was still pale, as he had been since the battle at Cata Idris, though he was beginning to get his colour back. It will improve your mind. Before Henry could reply, the door opened, and Charlotte came in, looking tired, the lace-edged sleeves of her sack dress stained with water. Will immediately set his book down, and Henry, too, looked up inquiringly from his sketchbook. Charlotte glanced from one of them to the other, noting the book on the side table beside the silver tea service. "Have you been reading to Henry, Will?" "Yes. Some dreadful thing, all full of poetry." Henry had a pen in one hand and papers scattered all over the lap rug, drawn up around his knees. Henry had met with his usual fortitude the news that even the Silent Brothers' healing would not let him walk again, and a conviction that he must build himself a chair, like a sort of bath chair but better, with self-propelling wheels and all manner of other accoutrements. He was determined that it would be able to go up and down stairs, so that he could still get to his inventions in the crypt. He had been scribbling designs for the chair the whole hour that Will had been reading to him from Maud. But then, poetry never had been Henry's area of interest. "Well, you are released from your duties, Will. And Henry, you're released from further poetry," said Charlotte. "If you like, darling, I can help you gather your notes." She slipped around behind her husband's chair and reached over his shoulders, helping scoop his scattered papers into a neat pile. He took her wrist as she moved and looked up at her, a gaze of such trust and adoration that it made Will feel as if tiny knives were cutting at his skin. It was not as if he begrudged Charlotte and Henry their happiness, far from it, but he could not help but think of Tessa, of the hopes he had cherished once and repressed later. He wondered if she had ever looked at him like that. He did not think so. He had worked so hard to destroy her trust, and though all he wanted was a true chance to rebuild it for her, he could not help but fear. He pushed the dark thoughts back and rose to his feet, about to explain that he intended to go see Tessa. Before he could speak, there was a knock at the door, and Sophie came in, looking unaccountably anxious. The anxiety was explained a moment later, when the Inquisitor followed her into the room. Will, used to seeing him in his ceremonial robes at council meetings, almost didn't recognize the stern-looking man in the grey morning coat and dark trousers. There was a livid scar on his cheek that had not been there before. "Inquisitor Whitelaw," Charlotte straightened up, her expression suddenly serious. "To what do we owe the honor of your visit?" "Charlotte," said the Inquisitor, and he held out his hand. There was a letter, sealed with the seal of the council. "I have brought a message for you." Charlotte looked at him in bewilderment. "You could not simply have sent it through the post." "This letter is of grave importance. It is imperative that you read it now." Slowly Charlotte reached out and took it. She pulled at the flap, then frowned and crossed the room to take a letter opener from her bureau. Will took the opportunity to stare at the Inquisitor covertly. The man was frowning at Charlotte and ignoring Will entirely. He could not help but wonder if the scar on the Inquisitor's cheek was a relic of the Council's battle with Mortmain's automatons. Will had been sure that they were all going to die, together, there under the mountain, until Tessa had blazed up in all the glory of the angel and struck down Mortmain like lightning striking down a tree. It had been one of the most wondrous things he had ever seen, but his wonder had been consumed quickly by terror when Tessa had collapsed after the change, bleeding and insensible, however hard they tried to wake her. Magnus, near exhaustion, had barely been able to open a portal back to the Institute with Henry's help, and Will remembered only a blur after that, a blur of exhaustion and blood and fear, more Silent Brothers summoned to tend the wounded, and the news coming from the Council of all who had been killed in battle before the automatons had disintegrated upon Mortmain's death. And Tessa not speaking, not waking, being carried off to her room by the Silent Brothers, and he had not been able to go with her. Being neither brother nor husband, he could only stand and stare after her, closing and unclosing his blood-stained hands. Never had he felt more helpless. And when he had turned to find Jem, to share his fear with the only person in the world who loved Tessa as much as he did, Jem had been gone, back to the Silent City on the orders of the brothers, gone without even a word of goodbye. Though Cecily had tried to soothe him, Will had been angry with Jem, and with the Council and the Brotherhood themselves, for allowing Jem to become a Silent Brother, though Will knew that that was unfair, that it had been Jem's choice, and the only way to keep him alive. And yet since their return to the Institute, Will had felt constantly seasick. It was like having been a ship at anchor for years and being cut free to float on the tides, with no idea which direction to steer in. And Tessa. The sound of tearing paper interrupted his thoughts, as Charlotte opened the letter and read it, the colour draining from her face. She lifted her eyes and stared at the Inquisitor. "Is this some sort of jest?" The Inquisitor's frown deepened. "There is no jest, I assure you. Do you have an answer?" "Lottie," said Henry, looking up at his wife, even his tufts of gingery hair radiating anxiety and love. "Lottie, what is it? What's wrong?" She looked at him, and then back at the Inquisitor. "No," she said. "I don't have an answer. Not yet." "The Council does not wish," he began, and then seemed to see Will for the first time. "If I could speak to you, in private, Charlotte." Charlotte straightened her spine. "I will not send either Will or Henry away." The two of them glared at each other, eyes locked. Will knew that Henry was looking at him anxiously. In the aftermath of Charlotte's disagreement with the Consul and the Consul's death, they had all waited breathlessly for the Council to hand down some sort of retributive judgment. Their hold on the Institute felt precarious. Will could see it in the minute trembling of Charlotte's hands and the set of her mouth. He wished suddenly that Jem or Tessa were here, someone he could speak to, someone he could ask what he should do for Charlotte, to whom he owed so much. "It's all right," he said, rising to his feet. He wanted to see Tessa, even if she would not open her eyes, not recognize him. "I had meant to go anyway." "Will," Charlotte protested. "It's all right, Charlotte," Will said again, and he pushed past the Inquisitor to the door. Once out in the corridor, he leaned against the wall for a moment, recovering himself. He couldn't help remembering his own words. God, it seemed a million years ago now, and no longer in the least bit funny. "The Consul? Breaking up our breakfast time? Whenever next? The Inquisitor over for tea?" If the Institute was taken from Charlotte, if they all lost their home, if Tessa... He could not finish the thought. Tessa would live. She must live. As he set off down the corridor, he thought of the blues and greens and greys of Wales. Perhaps he could return there, with Cecily, if the Institute was lost, make some kind of life for themselves in their home country. It would not be shadow-hunting life, but without Charlotte, without Henry, without Jem or Tessa or Sophie, or even the bloody Lightwoods, he did not want to be a shadow-hunter. They were his family, and precious to him. Just another realization, he thought, that had come to him all at once, and yet too late. "Tessa, wake up. Please wake up." Sophie's voice now, cutting through the darkness. Tessa struggled, forcing her eyes open for a split second. She saw her bedroom at the Institute, the familiar furniture, the drapes pulled back, weak sunlight casting squares of light on the floor. She fought to hold on to it. It was like this, brief periods of lucidity in between fever and nightmares. Never enough time to reach out, to speak. "Sophie." She fought to whisper, but her dry lips would not pass the words. Lightning shivered down through her vision, splitting the world apart. She cried out soundlessly as the Institute broke into pieces and rushed away from her into the dark. It was Cyril who finally told Gabriel that Cecily was in the stables, after the younger Lightwood brother had spent much of the day searching fruitlessly, though he hoped not obviously, through the Institute for her. Twilight had come, and the stable was full of warm yellow lantern light and the smell of horses. Cecily was standing by Balias's stall, her head against the neck of the great black horse. Her hair, nearly the same inky colour, was loose over her shoulders. When she turned to look at him, Gabriel saw the wink of the red ruby around her throat. A look of concern passed across her face. "Has something happened to Will?" "Will?" Gabriel was startled. "I just thought, the way you looked," she sighed. "He's been so distraught these past few days." If it were not enough that Tessa is ill and injured, to know what he does about Jem. She shook her head. I've tried to speak to him about it, but he'll say nothing. I think he is speaking to Jem now, Gabriel said. I confess, I do not know his state of mind. If you wish, I could— No. Cecily's voice was quiet. Her blue eyes were fixed on something far away. Let him be. Gabriel took a few steps forward. The soft yellow glow of the lantern at Cecily's feet laid a faint golden sheen over her skin. Her hands were bare of gloves, very white against the horse's black hide. He began. You seem to like that horse very much. Silently he cursed himself. He remembered his father once saying that women, the gentler sex, liked to be wooed with charming words and pithy phrases. He wasn't sure exactly what a pithy phrase was, but he was sure that "You seem to like that horse very much" was not one. Cecily seemed not to mind, though. She gave the horse's hide an absent pat before turning to face him. Balliol saved my brother's life. Are you going to leave? Gabriel said abruptly. Her eyes widened. What was that, Mr. Lightwood? No, he held his hand up. Don't call me Mr. Lightwood, please. We are shadow hunters. I'm Gabriel to you. Her cheeks pinked. Gabriel, then. Why did you ask me if I am leaving? You came to bring your brother home, said Gabriel, but it is clear that he is not going to go, isn't it? He is in love with Tessa. He is going to stay wherever she is. She might not stay here, Cecily said, her eyes unreadable. I think she will. But even if she does not, he will go where she is. And Jem has become a silent brother. He is still Nephilim. If Will hopes to see him again, and I think we know he does, he will remain. The years have changed him, Cecily. His family is here now. Do you think you're telling me anything I have not observed for myself? Will's heart is here, not in Yorkshire, in a house he has never lived in, with parents he has not seen for years. Then, if he cannot go home, I thought perhaps that you would. So that my parents are not alone. Yes, I can see why you would think that. She hesitated. You know, of course, that in a few years I would be expected to be married, and to leave my parents regardless. But not to never speak to them again. They are exiled, Cecily. If you remain here, you will be cut off from them. You say it as if you wish to convince me to return home. I say it because I'm afraid you will. The words were out of his mouth before he could recapture them. He could only look at her as a flush of embarrassment heated his face. She took a step toward him. Her blue eyes, upturned to his, were wide. He wondered when they had stopped reminding him of Will's eyes. They were just Cecily's eyes, a shade of blue he associated with her alone. When I came here, she said, I thought the shadow hunters were monsters. I thought I had to rescue my brother. I thought that we would return home together, and my parents would be proud of us, both. That we would be a family again. Then I realized. You helped me realize. I helped you? How? Your father did not give you choices, she said. He demanded that you be what he wanted, and that demand broke your family apart. But my father, he chose to leave the Nephilim and marry my mother. That was his choice. Just as staying with the shadow hunters is Will's. Choosing love or war, both are brave choices in their own ways. And I do not think my parents would grudge Will his choice. Above all, what matters to them is that he be happy. But what of you? Gabriel said, and they were very close now, almost touching. It is your choice to make now, to stay or return. I will stay, Cecily said. I choose the war. Gabriel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You will give up your home. A drafty old house in Yorkshire, Cecily said. This is London. And give up what is familiar. Familiar is dull. And give up seeing your parents. It is against the law. She smiled, the glimmer of a smile. Everyone breaks the law. Ceci, he said, and closed the distance between them, though it was not much. And then he was kissing her. his hands awkward around her shoulders at first, slipping on the stiff taffeta of her gown before his fingers slid behind her head, tangling in her soft, warm hair. She stiffened in surprise before softening against him, the seam of her lips parting as he tasted the sweetness of her mouth. When she drew away at last, he felt light-headed. "Ceci," he said again, his voice hoarse. "5," she said. Her lips and cheeks were flushed, but her gaze was steady. "5?" he echoed blankly. "My rating," she said, and smiled at him. "Your skill and technique may, perhaps, require work, but the native talent is certainly there. What you require is practice." "And are you willing to be my tutor?" "I should be very insulted if you choose another," she said, and leaned up to kiss him again. When Will came into Tessa's room, Sophie was sitting by her bed, murmuring in a soft voice. She swung around as the door closed behind Will. The corners of her mouth looked pinched and worried. "How is she?" Will asked, pushing his hands deep into his trouser pockets. It hurt to see Tessa like this. Hurt as if a sliver of ice had lodged itself under his ribs and was digging into his heart. Sophie had plaited Tessa's long brown hair neatly, so that it would not tangle when she tossed her head fitfully against the pillows. She breathed quickly, her chest rising and falling fast, her eyes visibly moving beneath her pale eyelids. He wondered what she was dreaming. "The same," Sophie said, rising gracefully to her feet, ceding him the chair beside the bed. "She's been calling out again." "For anyone in particular?" Will asked, and then was immediately sorry he had asked. Surely his motives would be ridiculously transparent. Sophie's dark hazel eyes darted away from his. "For her brother," she said. "If you wish a few moments alone with Miss Tessa—" "Yes, please, Sophie." She paused at the door. "Master William," she said. Having just settled himself in the armchair beside the bed, Will glanced over at her. "I'm sorry I have thought and spoken so ill of you for all these years," Sophie said. "I understand now that you were only doing what we all try to do, our best." Will reached out and placed his hand over Tessa's left one, where it plucked feverishly at the coverlet. "Thank you," he said, unable to look at Sophie directly. A moment later, he heard the door softly close behind her. He looked at Tessa. She was momentarily quiet, her lashes fluttering as she breathed. The circles beneath her eyes were dark blue, her veins a delicate filigree at her temples, and the insides of her wrists. When he remembered her blazing up in glory, it was impossible to believe her fragile. Yet here she was. Her hand felt hot in his, and when he brushed his knuckles against her cheek, her skin was burning. "Tess," he whispered, "hell is cold. Do you remember when you told me that? We were in the cellars of the dark house. Anyone else would have been panicking, but you were as calm as a governess, telling me hell was covered in ice. If it is the fire of heaven that takes you from me, what a cruel irony that would be." She breathed in sharply, and for a moment his heart leaped. Had she heard him? But her eyes remained firmly shut. His hand tightened on hers. "Come back," he said. "Come back to me, Tessa. Henry said that perhaps, since you had touched the soul of an angel, that you dream of heaven now, of fields of angels and flowers of fire. Perhaps you are happy in those dreams, but I ask this out of pure selfishness. Come back to me, for I cannot bear to lose all my heart." Her head turned slowly toward him, her lips parted, as if she were about to speak. He leaned forward, heart leaping. "Jem?" she said. He froze, unmoving, his hands still wrapped about hers. Her eyes fluttered open, as grey as the sky before rain, as grey as the slate hills of Wales, the colour of tears. She looked at him, through him, not seeing him at all. "Jem," she said again. "Jem, I am so sorry. It is all my fault." Will leaned forward again. He could not help himself. She was speaking incomprehensibly for the first time in days, even if not to him. "It's not your fault," he said. She returned the pressure of his hand hotly. Each of her individual fingers seemed to burn through his skin. "But it is," she said. "It is because of me that Mortmain deprived you of your yin fin. It is because of me that all of you were in danger. I was meant to love you, and all I did was shorten your life." Will took a ragged breath. The splinter of ice was back in his heart, and he felt as if he were breathing around it. And yet it was not jealousy, but a sorrow more profound and deeper than any he thought he had known before. He thought of Sidney Carton. Think now and then that there is a man who would give his life to keep a life you love beside you. Yes, he would have done that for Tessa, died to keep the ones she needed beside her. And so would Jem have done that for him or for Tessa, and so would Tessa, he thought, do that for both of them. It was a near incomprehensible tangle, the three of them, but there was one certainty, and that was that there was no lack of love between them. "I am strong enough for this," he told himself, lifting her hand gently. "Life is not just surviving," he said. "There is also happiness. You know your James, Tessa. You know he would choose love over the span of his years." But Tessa's head only tossed fretfully on the pillow. "Where are you, James? I search for you in the darkness, but I cannot find you. You are my intended. We should be bound by ties that cannot sever. And yet, when you were dying, I was not there. I have never said goodbye." "What darkness, Tessa? Where are you?" Will gripped her hand. "Give me a way to find you." Tessa arched back on the bed suddenly, her hand clamping down on his. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "Jem, I am so sorry. I have wronged you horribly." "Tessa!" Will bolted to his feet, but Tessa had already collapsed bonelessly onto the mattress, breathing hard. He could not help it. He cried out for Charlotte like a child who had woken from a nightmare, as he had never permitted himself to cry out when he truly was a child, waking in the then unfamiliar institute and longing for comfort, but knowing he must not take it. Charlotte came running through the institute, as he had always known she would come running for him if he called. She arrived, breathless and frightened. She took one look at Tessa on the bed, and Will clasping her hand, and he saw the terror leave her face, replaced by the look of wordless sorrow. "Will?" Will gently detached his hand from Tessa's, turning toward the door. "Charlotte," he said, "I have never asked you to use your position as head of the institute to help me before. My position cannot heal Tessa. It can. You must bring Jem here." "I cannot demand that," Charlotte said. "Jem has only just begun his term of service in the Silent City. New initiates are not meant to leave at all for the first year. He came to battle." Charlotte pushed a stray curl from her face. Sometimes she looked very young, as she did now, though earlier, facing the Inquisitor in the drawing room, she had not. That was Brother Enoch's choice. Certainty straightened Will's spine. For so many years he had doubted the contents of his own heart. He did not doubt them now. "Tessa needs Jem," he said. "I know the law. I know he cannot come home. But the Silent Brothers are meant to sever every bond that ties them to the mortal world before they can join the Brotherhood. That is also the law. The bond between Tessa and Jem was not severed. How is she to rejoin the mortal world, then, if she cannot even see Jem one last time?" Charlotte was silent for a space of time. There was a shadow over her face, one he could not define. Surely she would want this, for Jem, for Tessa, for both of them. "Very well," she said at last. "I shall see what I can do." They lighted down to take a drink of the spring that ran so clear, and there she spied his bonny heart's blood a-running down the stream. Hold up, Lord William," she said, "for I fear that you are slain. 'Tis naught but the dye of my scarlet clothes that is sparkling down the stream." "Oh, for goodness sake," Sophie muttered as she passed the kitchen. Did Bridget really have to be so morbid in all her songs? And did she have to use Will's name? As if the poor boy hadn't suffered enough. A shadow materialized out of the darkness. "Sophie?" Sophie screamed and nearly dropped her carpet brush. Witchlight flared up from the dim corridor, and she saw familiar grey-green eyes. "Gideon!" she exclaimed. "Heavens above, you nearly frightened me to death." He looked penitent. "I apologize. I only wished to wish you good night. And you were smiling as you walked along. I thought—" "I was thinking about Master Will," she said, and then smiled again at his dismayed expression. "Only that a year ago, if you had told me that someone was tormenting him, I would have been delighted. But now, I find myself in sympathy with him. That is all." He looked sober. "I am in sympathy with him as well. Every day that Tessa does not wake, you can see a bit of the life drain out of him." "If only Master Jem were here," Sophie sighed. "But he is not. There is much we must learn to live without these days." Gideon touched her cheek lightly with his fingers. They were rough, the fingers calloused, not the smooth fingers of a gentleman. Sophie smiled at him. "You didn't look at me at dinner," he said, dropping his voice. It was true. Dinner had been a quick affair of cold roast chicken and potatoes. No one had seemed to have much appetite, save Gabriel and Cecily, who had eaten as if they had spent the day training. Perhaps they had. "I've been concerned about Mrs. Bramwell," Sophie confessed. "She's been so worried about Mr. Bramwell and about Miss Tessa. She's wasting away. And the baby—" she bit her lip. "I'm concerned," she said again. She could not bring herself to say more. It was hard to lose the reticence of a lifetime of service, even if she was engaged to a shadow hunter now. "Yours is a gentle heart," Gideon said, sliding his fingers down her cheek to touch her lips, like the lightest of kisses. Then he drew back. "I saw Charlotte go alone into the drawing room only a few moments ago. Perhaps you could have a word with her about your concern." "I couldn't." "Sophie," Gideon said, "you are not just Charlotte's maid. You are her friend. If she will talk to anyone, it will be to you." The drawing room was cold and dark. There was no fire in the grate, and none of the lamps were lit against the cloak of night, which cast the chamber into gloom and shadow. It took Sophie a moment to even realize that one of the shadows was Charlotte, the small, silent figure in the chair behind the desk. "Mrs. Bramwell," she said, feeling a great awkwardness come upon her, despite Gideon's encouraging words. 2 days ago she and Charlotte had fought side by side at Cadair Idris. Now she was a servant again, here to clean the grate and dust the room for the next day's use, a bucket of coals in one hand, tinderbox in her apron pocket. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt." "You are not interrupting, Sophie. Not anything important." Charlotte's voice. Sophie had never heard her sound like that before, so small or so defeated. Sophie set the coals down by the fire and approached her mistress hesitantly. Charlotte was seated with her elbows on the desk, her face resting in her hands. A letter was on the desk, with the seal of the council broken open. Sophie's heart sped suddenly, remembering how the consul had ordered them all out of the institute before the battle at Cadair Idris. But surely it had been proved that they were correct. Surely their defeat of Mortmain would have cancelled out the consul's edict, especially now that he was dead. Is everything all right, Mom?" Charlotte gestured toward the paper, a hopeless flutter of her hand. Her insides turning cold, Sophie hurried to Charlotte's side and took the letter from the desk. "Mrs. Bramwell, considering the nature of the correspondence you had entered into with my late colleague, Consul Wayland, you may well be surprised to receive this missive. The clave, however, finds itself in the position of requiring a new consul, and when put to a vote, the foremost choice among us was yourself. I can well understand that you may be satisfied with the running of the Institute, and that you may not wish the responsibility of this position, especially considering the injuries sustained by your husband in your brave battle against the Magister. However, I felt it incumbent upon me to offer you this opportunity, not only because you are clearly the desired choice of the Council, but because, given what I have seen of you, I think you would make one of the finer consuls it has been my privilege to serve beside. Yours with the highest regard, Inquisitor Whitelaw.
Consul?
Sophie gasped, and the paper fluttered from her fingers.
They want to make you consul.
So it seems. Charlotte's voice was lifeless. Sophie reached for what to say. The idea of a London institute not run by Charlotte was dreadful, and yet the position of consul was an honour, the highest the Clave had to give, and to see Charlotte covered in the honour she had so dearly earned. There is no one more deserving of this than you, she said at last. Oh, Sophie, no. I was the one who chose to send us all to Cadair Idris. It is my fault Henry will never walk again. I did that.
He cannot blame you. He does not blame you.
No, he does not. But I blame myself. How can I be the consul and send shadow hunters into battle to die? I do not want that responsibility. Sophie took Charlotte's hand in hers and pressed it.
Charlotte, she said, it is not just sending shadow hunters into battle. Sometimes it is a matter of holding them back. You have a compassionate heart and a thoughtful mind. You have led the Enclave for years. Of course your heart is broken for Mr. Branwell, but to be the consul is not a matter only of taking lives, but also of saving them. If it had not been for you, if there had been only Consul Wayland, how many shadow hunters would have died at the hands of Mortmain's creatures? Charlotte looked down at Sophie's red, work-roughened hand, clasping hers. Sophie, she said, when did you become so wise? Sophie blushed. I learned wisdom from you, Ma'am. Oh, no, Charlotte said. A moment ago you called me Charlotte. As a future shadow hunter, Sophie, you shall be calling me Charlotte from now on, and we shall be bringing in another maid to take your place, so that your time will be free to prepare for your ascension. Thank you, Sophie whispered. So will you accept the offer? Become the consul? Charlotte gently freed her hand from Sophie's and took up her pen. I will, she said, on 3 conditions. What will those be? The first is that I am allowed to lead the Clave from this institute here, and not move myself and my family to Idris, at least for the first few years. For I do not want to leave you all, and besides, I wish to be here to train Will to take over the Institute for me when I do depart. Will? Said Sophie in astonishment. Take over the Institute? Charlotte smiled. Of course, she said. That is the second condition. And the third? Charlotte's smile faded, replaced by a look of determination. That you shall see the result of as soon as tomorrow, if it is accepted, she said, and bent her head to begin writing. Chapter 23. Than any evil. Come, let us go. Your cheeks are pale, but half my life I leave behind. Methinks my friend is richly shrined, but I shall pass, my work will fail. I hear it now, and o'er, eternal greetings to the dead. And Ave, 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 said, Adieu, adieu, for evermore. Alfred Lord Tennyson, In Memoriam, A.H.H. Tessa shivered. The cold water rushed around her in the darkness. She thought she might be lying at the bottom of the universe, where the river of forgetfulness split the world in two, or perhaps she was still in the stream,
where she had collapsed after falling from the Dark Sister's carriage, and everything that happened since had been a dream. Kada Idris, Mortmain, the Clockwork Army, Will's arms about her. Guilt and sorrow drove through her like a spear, and she arched backward, her hands scrabbling for purchase in the darkness. Fire ran through her veins, 1,000 branching streams of agony. She gasped for breath, and suddenly there was something cold against her teeth, parting her lips, and her mouth was full of a freezing sourness. She swallowed hard, choking, and felt the fire in her veins subside. Ice shuddered through her, her eyes flew open, as the world spun and righted itself. The first thing she saw was pale, slim hands withdrawing a vial, the coldness in her mouth, the bitter taste on her tongue, and then the contours of her bedroom at the Institute. "Tessa," said a familiar voice, "this will keep you lucid for a time, but you must not let yourself fall back into darkness and dreams." She froze, not daring to look. "Jem?" she whispered. The sound of the vial being set down on the bedside table. A sigh. "Yes," he said. "Tessa, will you look at me?" She turned and looked, and drew in her breath. It was Jem, and not Jem. He wore the parchment robes of a silent brother, open at the throat to show the collar of an ordinary shirt. His hood was thrown back, revealing his face. She could see the changes in him, where she had only barely seen them in the noise and confusion of the battle at Kada Idris. His delicate cheekbones were scarred with the runes she had noticed before, one on each, long slashes of scars that did not look like ordinary Shadowhunter runes. His hair was no longer pure silver. Streaks of it had darkened to black-brown, no doubt the color he had been born with. His eyelashes, too, had darkened to black. They looked like fine strands of silk against his pale skin, though he was no longer as pale as he had been. "How is it possible," she whispered, "that you are here?" "I was called from the Silent City by the Council." His voice was not the same either. There was an undertone of something cool to it, something that had not been there before. "Charlotte's influence, I was given to understand. I am allowed an hour with you, no more." "An hour?" Tessa echoed, stunned. She put her hand up to push her hair from her face. What a fright she must look, in her crumpled nightgown, her hair hanging in tangled plaits, her lips dry and cracked. She reached for the clockwork angel at her neck, a familiar, habitual gesture, meant to comfort, but the angel was no longer there. "Jem, I thought you were dead." "Yes," he said, and there was that remoteness in his voice still, a distance that reminded her of the icebergs she had seen off the side of the main, floes drifting far out in icy water. "I am sorry. I am sorry I couldn't somehow, that I couldn't tell you." "I thought you were dead," Tessa said again. "I can't believe you're real now. I dreamed of you over and over. There was a dark corridor, and you were walking away from me, and however I called out, you could not, would not turn to see me. Perhaps this is only another dream." "This is no dream." He rose to his feet and stood in front of her, his pale hands interlaced in front of him, and she could not forget that this was how he had proposed to her, standing as she sat upon the bed looking up at him incredulous, as she was now. He opened his hands slowly, and on the palms, as on his cheeks, she saw great black runes scored. She was not familiar enough with the codex to recognize them, but she knew instinctively that they were not the runes of an ordinary shadow hunter. They spoke of a power beyond that. "You told me it was impossible," she whispered, "that you could not become a silent brother." He turned away from her. There was something to his motions now that was different, something of the gliding softness of the silent brothers. It was both lovely and chilling. What was he doing? Could he not bear to look at her? "I told you what I believed," he said, his face turned toward the window. In profile, she could see that some of the painful thinness of his face had faded, His cheekbones were no longer so pronounced, the hollows of his temples no longer so dark. And that was true, that the yin fen in my blood prevented the runes of the Brotherhood from being placed upon me. She saw his chest rise and fall beneath the parchment robes, and it almost startled her. It seemed so human, the need to draw breath. Every effort that had ever been made to wean me slowly from the yin fen had nearly killed me. When I ceased to take it because there was no more, I felt my body begin to break from the inside out, and I thought I had nothing more to lose. The intensity in Jem's voice warmed it. Was that a tone of humanity there, a crack in the armor of the Brotherhood? I begged Charlotte to call the Silent Brothers and ask them to place the runes of the Brotherhood on me at the very last possible moment, the moment when the life was leaving my body. I knew that the runes might mean I died in agony, but it was the only chance. You said that you did not wish to become a Silent Brother, did not wish to live forever. He had taken a few steps across the room and was beside her vanity table. He reached down and lifted something metallic and glittering from a shallow jewelry dish. She realized with a shock of surprise that it was her clockwork angel. It no longer ticks, he said. She could not read his voice. It was distant, as smooth and cool as stone. Its heart is gone. When I changed into the angel, I freed it from its clockwork prison. It no longer lives within. It no longer protects me. His hand closed around the angel, the wings digging hard into the flesh of his palm. I must tell you, he said. When I received Charlotte's demand that I come here, it was against my wishes. You did not wish to see me? No, I did not want you to look at me as you are looking at me now. Jem, she swallowed, tasting on her tongue the bitterness of the tisane he had given her. A whirl of memories, the darkness under Kada Idris, the town on fire, Will's arms around her. Will. But she had thought Jem was dead. Jem, she said again, when I saw you alive, there below Kada Idris, I thought it was a dream or a lie. I had thought you dead. It was the darkest moment of my life. Believe me, please believe me, that my soul rejoices to see you again, when I thought that I never would. It's just that... He released his grip on the metal angel, and she saw the lines of blood on his hand, where the tips of the wings had cut him, scored across the runes on his palm. I am strange to you, not human. You will always be human to me, she whispered, but I cannot quite see my Jem in you now. He closed his eyes. She was used to dark shadows on his lids, but they were gone now. I had no choice. You were gone, and in my stead Will had gone after you. I did not fear death, but I feared deserting you both. This then was my only recourse, to live, to stand and fight. A little colour had come into his voice. There was passion there, under the cold detachment of the Silent Brothers. But I knew what I would lose, he said, once you understood my music. Now you look at me as though you do not know me at all, as though you never loved me. Tessa slid out from beneath the coverlet and stood. It was a mistake. Her head swam suddenly, her knees buckling. She threw out a hand to catch one of the posts of the bed, and found herself with a handful of Jem's parchment robes instead. He had darted toward her with a graceful, quiet tread of the brothers that was like smoke unfurling, and his arms were around her now, holding her up. She went still in his arms. He was close enough that she should have been able to feel the warmth coming off his body, but she did not. His usual scent of smoke and burned sugar was gone. There was only the faint scent of something dry and as cold as old stone or paper. She could feel the muffled beat of his heart, see the pulse in his throat. She stared up at him in wonder, memorizing the lines and angles of his face, the scars on his cheekbones, the rough silk of his eyelashes, the bow of his mouth. Tessa. The word came out on a groan, as if she had hit him. There was the faintest trace of colour in his cheeks, blood under snow. Oh God, he said, and buried his face in the crook of her neck, where the curve of her shoulder began, his cheek against her hair. His palms were flat against her back, pressing her harder against him. She could feel him trembling. For a moment, she was unmoored by the heady relief of it, the feeling of Jem under her hands. Perhaps you did not really believe in a thing until you could touch it. And here was Jem, who she had thought was dead, holding her and breathing, and alive. "You feel the same," she said, "and yet you look so different. You are different." He broke away from her at that, with an effort that made him bite his lip and corded the muscles in his throat. Holding her gently by the shoulders, he guided her to sit down again upon the edge of the bed. When he released her, his hands curled into fists. He took a step back. She could see him breathing, see the pulse going in his throat. "I am different," he said in a low voice. "I am changed, and not in a way that can be undone." "But you are not entirely one of them yet," she said. "You can speak and see." He exhaled slowly. He was still staring at the post of the bed, as if it held the universe's secrets. "There is a process, a series of rituals and procedures. No, I am not quite a silent brother yet, but I will be soon." "So the Yin-Fen did not prevent it?" "Almost. There was pain when I made the transition, great pain that nearly killed me. They did what they could, but I shall never be like other silent brothers." He looked down, his lashes veiling his eyes. "I shall not be quite as they are. I will be less powerful, for there are some runes still that I cannot withstand." "Surely they can just wait now for the Yin-Fen to leave your body completely." "It will not. My body has been arrested in the state it was in when they put the first runes on me here." He indicated the scars on his face. "Because of it, there will be skills I cannot achieve. It will take me much longer to master their vision and speech of the mind." "Does that mean that they will not take your eyes, sew your lips shut?" "I don't know." His voice was soft now, almost entirely the voice of the Jem she knew. There was a flush across his cheekbones, and she thought of a pale column of hollow marble slowly filling with human blood. "They will have me for a long time, perhaps forever. I cannot say what will happen. I have given myself over to them. My fate is in their hands now." "If we could free you from them, then the Yin-Fen that remains in me would burn again, and I would be as I was, an addict dying. This is my choice, Tessa, because it is death otherwise. You know that it is. I do not want to leave you, even knowing that becoming a silent brother could ensure my survival. I fought it as if it were a prison sentence. Silent brothers cannot marry. They cannot have parabatai. They can live only in the silent city. They do not laugh, and they cannot play music." "Oh, Jem," Tessa said. "Perhaps the silent brothers cannot play music, but neither can the dead. If this is the only way you can live, then I rejoice in my soul for you, even as my heart sorrows. I know you too well to think that you would feel another way. And I know you well enough to know that you feel bowed by guilt. But why? You've done nothing wrong." He bent his head so that his forehead rested on the bedpost. He closed his eyes. "This is why I did not want to come." "But I am not angry." "I did not think you would be angry," Jem burst out, and it was like ice cracking across a frozen waterfall, freeing a torrent. "We were engaged, Tessa. A proposal, an offer of marriage is a promise to love and care for someone always. I did not mean to break mine to you, but it was that or die. I wanted to wait, to be married to you, and to live with you for years, but that wasn't possible. I was dying too fast. I would have given it up, all of it up, to be married to you for a day that would never have come. You are a reminder of everything I am losing, the life I will not have."
To give up your life for one day of marriage would not have been worth it, Tessa said. Her heart was pounding out a message that spoke to her of Will's arms around her, his lips on hers in the cave under Cadair Idris. She didn't deserve Jem's gentle confessions, his penitence, or his longing. Jem, I must tell you something. He looked at her. She could see the black in his eyes, threads of black alongside the silver, beautiful and strange. It's about Will. About Will and me. He loves you, Jem said. I know he loves you. We spoke of it before he left here. Though the coldness had not returned to his voice, he sounded suddenly, almost unnaturally calm. Tessa was shocked. I didn't know that you had ever talked of it with each other. Will did not say. Nor did you ever tell me of his feelings, though you knew for months. We all have our secrets that we keep because we do not want to hurt the people who love us. There was a sort of warning in his voice, or was she imagining it? I do not want to keep secrets from you any longer, Tessa said. I thought you were dead. Will and I both did, in Cadair Idris. Did you love me? He interrupted. It seemed an odd question, and yet he asked it without implication or hostility, and waited quietly for her answer. She looked at him, and Wolsey's words came back to her, like the whisper of a prayer. Most people never find one great love in their life. You are lucky to have found two. For a moment, she put aside her confession. Yes, I loved you. I love you still. I love Will too. I cannot explain it. I didn't know it when I agreed to marry you. I loved you. I still love you. I never loved you less for all that I love him. It sounds mad. But if anyone might ever understand— I do, Jem said. There is no need to tell me more about yourself and Will. There is nothing you could have done that would cause me to cease loving either of you. Will is myself, my own soul. And if I am not to have the keeping of your heart, then there is no other I would rather have that honor. And when I am gone, you must help Will. It will be hard for him. Tessa searched his face with her gaze. The blood had left his cheeks. He was pale but composed. His jaw was set. It said all she needed to understand. Do not tell me more. I do not want to know. Some secrets, she thought, were better told. Some were better left the burden of the carrier, that they may not cause pain to others. It was why she had not told Will she loved him, when there was nothing either of them could do about it. She closed her mouth on what she had been intending to say, and said instead, I do not know how I will manage without you. I ask myself the same thing. I do not want to leave you. I cannot leave you. But if I stay, I die here. No, you must not stay. You will not stay. Jem, promise, you will go. Go and be a silent brother, and live. I would tell you I hated you, if I thought you would believe me, if it would make you go. I want you to live, even if it means I shall never see you again. You will see me, he said quietly, raising his head. In fact, there is a chance. Only a chance. But what? He paused, hesitated, and seemed to make his mind up about something. Nothing. Foolishness. Jem? You will see me again, but not often. I have only just begun my journey. There are many laws that govern the Brotherhood. I'll be moving away from my previous life. I cannot say what abilities or what scars I will have. I cannot say how I will be different. I fear I will lose myself and my music. I fear I will become something other than wholly human. I know I will not be your Jem. Tessa could only shake her head. But the Silent Brothers, they visit, they mingle with other shadow hunters. Can you not? Not during their time of training. And even when they're done, rarely. You see us when someone is ill or dying, when a child is born, for the rituals of the first runes, or of Parabatai. We do not grace the homes of shadow hunters without a summoning. Then Charlotte will summon you. She called me here this once. But she cannot do it over and over again, Tessa. A shadow hunter cannot summon a silent brother for no reason.
But I am not a shadow hunter, Tessa said. Not truly. There was a long silence as they looked at each other, both stubborn, both unmoving. At last, Jem spoke.
Do you remember when we stood together on Blackfriars Bridge? He asked softly, and his eyes were like that night had been, all black and silver.
Of course I remember.
It was the moment I first knew I loved you, Jem said. I will make you a promise. Every year, Tessa, on one day, I will meet you on that bridge. I will come from the Silent City, and I will meet you, and we will be together, if only for an hour. But you must tell no one.
An hour every year? Tessa whispered.
It is not much.
She recollected herself. Then she took a deep breath.
But you will live.
You will live. That is what is important. I will not be visiting your grave.
No, not for a long, long time, he said,
and the distance was back in his voice.
Then that is a miracle, Tessa said.
And one does not question miracles, or complain that they are not constructed perfectly to one's liking. She reached up and touched the jade pendant about her throat. Shall I return this to you?
No, he said. I will marry no one else now, and I shall not take my mother's bridal gift to the Silent City. He reached out and touched her face lightly, a brush of skin on skin. When I am in the darkness, I want to think of it in the light, with you, he said, and straightened and turned to walk toward the door. The parchment robes of the Silent Brothers moved around him as he moved, and Tessa watched him, paralyzed, every pulse of her heart beating out the words she could not say. Goodbye. 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 He paused at the door. I shall see you on Blackfriars Bridge, Tessa. And he was gone. If Will closed his eyes, he could hear the sounds of the Institute coming to life early in the morning around him, or at least he could imagine them. Sophie setting the breakfast table, Charlotte and Cyril helping Henry to his chair, the Lightwood brothers sparring sleepily in the corridors, Cecily, no doubt, looking for him in his room, as she had several mornings in a row now, trying and failing to conceal her obvious worry. And in Tessa's room, Jem and Tessa talking. He knew Jem was here, because of the carriage of the Silent Brothers was drawn up in the courtyard. He could see it from the training room windows, but that was not something he could think about. It was what he had wanted, what he had asked Charlotte for, but now that it was transpiring, he found that he could not bear to think on it too closely. So he had taken himself to the room where he always went when his mind was troubled. He had been throwing knives at the wall since the sun had come up, and his shirt was soaked with sweat and sticking to his back. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The knives hit the wall, each one in the center of the target. He remembered when he had been 12, and getting the knife anywhere near its goal had seemed an impossible dream. Jem had helped him, showed him how to hold a blade, how to line up the point and throw. Of all the places in the Institute, the training room was the one he most associated with Jem, save Jem's own room, and that had been stripped of Jem's belongings. It was just another empty Institute room now, waiting for another shadow hunter to fill it. Even Church did not seem to want to go into it. He would stand by the door sometimes, and wait as cats did, but he no longer slept on the bed as he had when Jem had lived there. Will shivered. The training room was cold in the early morning greyness. The fire in the grate was burning down, a fanged shadow of red and gold spitting colourful embers. Will could see 2 boys in his mind, sitting on the floor in front of the fire in the same room, one with black hair, and one whose hair was as fair as snow. He had been teaching Jem how to play écarté with a deck of cards he had stolen from the drawing room. At one point, disgruntled upon losing, Will had thrown the cards into the fire and watched in fascination as they burned one by one, the fire punching holes in the glossy white paper. Jem had laughed. "You can't win like that." "Sometimes it's the only way to win," Will had said. "Burn it all down."
He went to retrieve the knives from the wall, scowling. Burn it all down. His whole body still hurt. As he plucked the blades free, he saw that there were greenish-blue bruises on his arms despite the Arazzis, and scars from the Kata Idris battle that he would have forever. He thought of fighting beside Jem in the battle. Maybe he had not appreciated it at the time. The last time. Like an echo of his thoughts, a shadow fell across the doorway. Will looked up and nearly dropped the knife he was holding.
"Jem," he said. "Is it you, James?" "Who else?"
Jem's voice. As he stepped forward into the light of the room, Will could see that the hood of his parchment robes was down, his gaze level with Will's. His face, eyes, all familiar. But Will had always been able to sense Jem before, sense his approach and his presence. The fact that Jem had startled him this time was a sharp reminder of the change in his parabatai.
"Not your parabatai any longer," said a small voice in the back of his mind.
Jem came into the room with the soundless tread of the Silent Brothers, closing the door behind him. Will did not move from where he stood. He did not feel that he could. The sight of Jem and Kata Idris had been a shock that had gone through his system like a terrible and wonderful incandescence. Jem was alive, but he was changed. He lived, but was lost.
"But," he said, "you're here to see Tessa."
Jem looked at him levelly. His eyes were grey-black, like slate, shot through with streaks of obsidian.
"And you do not think I would take the chance, whatever chance I could, to see you too?"
"I did not know. You left, after the battle, without a farewell." Jem took a few steps forward into the room. Will felt his spine tighten. There was something strange, something bone-deep and different about the way Jem moved now. This was not the Shadowhunter's grace Will had trained himself over so many years to mimic, but something strange and alien and new. Jem must have seen something in Will's expression, for he paused.
"How could I say farewell," he said, "to you?"
Will let the knife fall from his hand. It stuck point down in the wood of the floor.
"As Shadowhunters do. Awe Akwe Wale. I'm forever, brother. Hail and farewell." But those are the words of death. Catullus spoke them over his brother's grave, did he not? "Multus per gentes, et multa per aecora, vectus advenio has, miseras frater ad inferias." Will knew the words. "Through many waters borne, brother, I come to thy sad grave, that I may give these last gifts to the dead. Forever and ever, brother, hail. Forever and ever, farewell." He stared. "You memorized the poem in Latin. But you were always the one who would memorize music, not words." He broke off with a short laugh. "Never mind. The rituals of the Brotherhood would have changed that." He turned and paced a few steps away, then spun abruptly to face Jem. "Your violin is in the music room. I thought you might have taken it with you. You cared for it so." "We can take nothing with us to the Silent City, but our own bodies and minds," said Jem. "I left the violin here for some future Shadowhunter who might wish to play it." "Not for me, then." "I would be honored if you would take it and care for it. But I left something else for you. In your room is my Yin Fen box. I thought you might want it."
"That seems a cruel sort of gift," Will said, "that I might be reminded."
"What took you away from me? What made you suffer? What I searched for and could not find? How I failed you?"
"Will know," said Jem, who, as always, understood without Will having to explain.
"It was not always a box that held my drugs. It was my mother's. Kuan Yin is the goddess depicted on the front. It is said that when she died and reached the gates of paradise, she paused and heard the cries of anguish from the human world below, and could not leave it. She remained to give aid to mortals when they cannot aid themselves. She is the comfort of all suffering hearts. A box will not comfort me.
Change is not loss, Will. Not always. Will pushed his hands through his damp hair. Oh yes, he said bitterly. Perhaps in some other life beyond this one, when we've passed beyond the river, or turned upon the wheel, or whatever kind words you want to use to describe leaving this world, I shall find my friend again, my Parabatai. But I've lost you now. Now, when I need you more than I ever did. Jem had moved across the room. Like a flicker of shadow, the silent brother's grace light upon him, and now stood beside the fire, the firelight illuminating his face, and Will could see that something seemed to shine through him, a sort of light that had not been there before. Jem had always shone, with fierce life and fiercer goodness, but this was something different. The light in Jem seemed to burn now. It was a distant light and a lonely one, like the light of a star. You don't need me, Will. Will looked down at himself, at the knife at his feet, and remembered the knife he had buried at the base of the tree on the Shrewsbury-Welshpool road, stained with his blood and gems. All my life, since I came to the Institute, you were the mirror of my soul. I saw the good in me in you. In your eyes alone I found grace. When you are gone from me, who will see me like that? There was a silence then. Jem stood as still as a statue. With his gaze, Will searched for and found the Parabatai rune on Jem's shoulder. Like his own, it had faded to a pale white. At last Jem spoke. The cool remoteness had left his voice. Will breathed in hard, remembering how much that voice had shaped the years of his growing up, its steady kindness a lighthouse beacon in the dark. Have faith in yourself. You can be your own mirror. What if I can't? Will whispered. I don't even know how to be a shadow hunter without you. I have only ever fought with you, by my side. Jem stepped forward, and this time Will did not move to discourage him. He came close enough to touch. Will thought distractedly that he had never stood so close to a silent brother before, that the fabric of the parchment robes was woven of a strange, tough, pale fabric, like the bark of a tree, and that cold seemed to emanate from Jem's skin, the way stone held a chill even on a hot day. Jem put his fingers under Will's chin, forcing Will to look directly at him. His touch was cold. Will bit at his lip. This was the last time Jem, as Jem, might ever touch him. The sharp memory went through him like a knife, of years of Jem's light tap on his shoulder, his hand reaching back to help Will up when he fell, Jem holding him back when he was furious, Will's own hands on Jem's thin shoulders as Jem coughed blood into his shirt. Listen to me. I am leaving, but I am living. I will not be gone from you entirely, Will. When you fight now, I will be still by you. When you walk in the world, I will be the light at your side, the ground steady under your feet, the force that drives the sword in your hand. We are bound, beyond the oath. The marks did not change that. The oath did not change that. It merely gave words to something that existed already. But what of you? Said Will. Tell me what I can do. For you are my Parabatai. I do not wish you to go into the shadows of the silent city alone. I have no choice. But if there is one thing I could ask of you, it is that you be happy. I want you to have a family, and grow old with those who love you. And if you wish to marry Tessa, then do not let the memory of me keep you apart. She may not want me, you know, Will said. Jem smiled fleetingly. Well, that part is up to you, I think. Will smiled back, and for just that moment, they were Jem and Will again. Will could see Jem, but also through him, to the past. Will remembered the two of them running through the dark streets of London, jumping from rooftop to rooftop, seraph blades gleaming in their hands. Hours in the training room, shoving each other into mud puddles, throwing snowballs at Jessamine from behind an ice fort in the courtyard, asleep like puppies on the rug in front of the fire. Awe acque wale, Will thought. Hail and farewell. He had not given much thought to the words before. He had never thought about why they were not just a farewell, but also a greeting. Every meeting led to a parting, and so it would, as long as life was mortal. In every meeting, there was some of the sorrow of parting, but in every parting, there was some of the joy of meeting as well. He would not forget the joy. "We spoke of how to say goodbye," Jem said. "When Jonathan bid farewell to David, he said, 'Go in peace. For as much as we have sworn, both of us, saying the Lord be between me and thee forever.' They did not see each other again, but they did not forget. So it will be with us. When I am Brother Zachariah, when I no longer see the world with my human eyes, I will still be, in some part, the Jem you knew, and I will see you with the eyes of my heart." "Wa men shu, shung su ji jiao," said Will, and he saw Jem's eyes widen, fractionally, and the spark of amusement inside them. "Go in peace, James Carstairs." They stayed looking at each other for a long moment, and then Jem drew up his hood, hiding his face in shadow, and turned away. Will closed his eyes. He could not hear Jem go, not any more. He did not want to know the moment when he left and Will was alone. Did not want to know when his first day as a shadow hunter without a parabatai truly began. And if the place over his heart, where his parabatai rune had been, flared up with a sudden burning pain as the door closed behind Jem, Will told himself it was only a stray ember from the fire. He leaned back against the wall, then slowly slid down it until he was sitting on the floor beside his throwing knife. He did not know how long he sat there, but he could hear the noise of horses in the courtyard, the rattle of the Silent Brothers' carriage pulling out of the drive, the clang of the gate as it shut. "We are dust and shadows." "Will?" He looked up. He had not noticed the slight figure in the doorway of the training room until she spoke. Charlotte took a step forward and smiled at him. There was kindness in her smile, as there always was, and he fought not to close his eyes against the memories. Charlotte in the doorway of this very room. "Didn't you recall what I told you yesterday? That we are welcoming a new arrival to the Institute today. James Carstairs." "Will?" she said again now. "You were correct." He lifted his head, his hands dangling between his knees. "Correct about what?" "About Jem and Tessa," she said. "Their engagement is ended, and Tessa is awake. She is awake and well, and asking for you." "When I am in the darkness, I will think of it in the light, with you." Tessa sat upright against the pillows Sophie had carefully arranged for her. The two girls had embraced, and Sophie had brushed the tangles from Tessa's hair and said, "Bless, bless," so many times that Tessa had to ask her to stop before she made them both cry, and looked down at the jade pendant in her hands. She felt as if she was split into two different people. One was counting her blessings over and over, that Jem was alive, that he would survive to see the sun rise again, that the poisonous drug he had suffered from so long would not burn the life out of his veins. The other, "Tess," a soft voice at the door. She looked up and saw Will there, silhouetted in the light of the corridor. Will. She thought of the boy who had come into her room at the dark house and distracted her from her terror by chattering about Tennyson and hedgehogs and dashing fellows who had come to rescue one, and how they were never wrong. She had thought him handsome then, but now she thought him something else entirely. He was Will, in all his perfect imperfection. Will, whose heart was as easy to break as it was carefully guarded. Will, who loved not wisely but entirely, and with everything he had. "Tess," he said again, hesitating at her silence, and came in, half closing the door behind him. Charlotte said you wished to speak with me." "Well," she said, and she knew she was too pale, and her skin was blotchy with tears, her eyes still red, but it didn't matter, because it was Will. And she put her hands out, and he came immediately and took them, closing them in his own warm, scarred fingers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. his eyes searching her face. "I must speak with you, but I do not wish to burden you until you are in full health again." "I am well," she said, returning the pressure of his fingers with her own. "Seeing Jem has eased my mind. Did it ease yours?" His eyes darted away from hers, though his grip on her hands did not slacken. "It did," he said, "and it did not." "Your mind was eased," she said, "but not your heart." "Yes," he said, "yes, that is exactly it. You know me so well, Tess." He gave a rueful smile. "He is alive, and for that I am grateful. But he has chosen a path of great loneliness, the Brotherhood. They eat alone and walk alone, rise alone and face the night alone. I would spare him that if I could." "You have spared him everything you could spare him," Tessa said quietly, "as he spared you, and we all tried so hard to spare one another. In the end, we must all make our own choices." "Are you saying I should not grieve?" "No, grieve. We both shall. Grieve, but do not blame yourself, for in this you bear no responsibility." He glanced down at their joined hands. Very gently, he stroked the tops of her knuckles with his thumbs. "Perhaps not," he said, "but there are other things I do bear responsibility for." Tessa took a quick, shallow breath. His voice had lowered, and there was a roughness to it she had not heard since. His breath, soft and hot against her skin, until she was breathing just as hard, her hands smoothing up and over his shoulders, his arms, his sides. She blinked hastily and withdrew her hands from his. She was not looking at him now, but seeing the firelight against the walls of the cave and hearing his voice in her ear, and it all seemed like a dream at the time, moments drawn out of real life, as if they were taking place in some other world. Even now, she could barely believe that it had happened at all. "Tessa." His voice was hesitant, his hands still outstretched. A part of her wanted to take them, to draw him down beside her and kiss him, to forget herself and Will as she had before, for he was as effective as any drug. And then she remembered Will's own clouded eyes in the opium den, the dreams of happiness that crashed into ruins the moment the effects of the smoke wore away. No, some things could be managed only by facing them. She took a breath and looked up at Will. "I know what you would say," she said. "You are thinking of what happened between us and Kata Idris, because we thought Jem was dead, and that we, too, would die. You are an honorable man, Will, and you know what you must do now. You must offer me marriage." Will, who had been very still, proved that he could still surprise her, and laughed. It was a soft laugh, and rueful. "I did not expect you to be so forthright. But I suppose I should have. I know my Tessa." "I am your Tessa," she said. "But, Will, I do not want you to speak now. Not of marriage, of lifelong promises." He sat down on the edge of the bed. He was in training gear, the loose shirt pushed up around his elbows, the throat open, and she could see the healing scars of the battle on his skin, the white remembrance of healing wounds. She could see the beginning of hurt, too, in his eyes. "You regret what happened between us." "Can one regret a thing that, however unwise, was beautiful?" she said, and the hurt in his eyes softened into confusion. "Tessa, if you are afraid that I feel reluctant, obligated—" "No," she put up her hands. "It is only that I feel your heart must be a tangle of grief and despair and relief and happiness and confusion. And I do not wish you to make pronouncements when you are so overwhelmed. And do not tell me that you are not overwhelmed, for I can see it upon you, and I feel it myself. We are both overwhelmed, Will, and neither of us is in any fit state to make decisions." For a moment he hesitated. His fingers hovered over his heart, where the Parabatai rune had been, touching it lightly. She wondered if he was even aware he was doing it, and then he said, "Sometimes I fear you may be too wise, Tessa." "Well," she said,
One of us has to be. Is there nothing I can do? He said. I would rather not leave your side unless you wish me to.
Tessa let her gaze fall to the bedside table, where the book she had been reading before the automaton attack on the Institute, it felt like 1,000 years ago, lay stacked. You could read to me, she said, if you would not mind. Will looked up at that and smiled. It was a raw, strange smile, but it was real. And it was Will. Tessa smiled back. I do not mind, he said. Not at all. Which was how, some quarter of an hour later, Will came to be sitting in an armchair, reading from David Copperfield, when Charlotte pushed the door of Tessa's room gently open with her fingers and peered inside. She could not help but be anxious. Will had looked so desperate, slumped on the floor of the training room, so very much alone, and she remembered the fear she had always harboured, that if Jem ever left them, he would take all the best of Will with him when he went. And Tessa, too, was still so fragile. Will's soft voice filled the room, along with the muted glow of the light from the fire in the grate. Tessa was lying on her side, her brown hair spread over the pillow, watching Will, whose face was bent over the pages, with a look of tenderness in her eyes, a tenderness mirrored in the softness of Will's voice as he read. It was a tenderness so intimate and so profound that Charlotte stepped away immediately, letting the door fall noiselessly shut behind her. Still, Will's voice followed her down the corridor as she walked away, her heart a great deal lighter than it had been moments ago. Anne cannot watch over him, if that is not too bold a thing to say, as closely as I would. But if any fraud or treachery is practising against him, I hope that simple love and truth will be strong in the end. I hope that real love and truth are stronger in the end than any evil or misfortune in the world. Chapter 24. The Measure of Love. The measure of love is to love without measure. Attributed to St. Augustine. The council room was full of light. A great double circle had been painted upon the raised dais at the front of the room, and in the space between the circles were runes. Runes of binding, runes of knowledge, runes of skill and craft, and the runes that symbolized Sophie's name. Sophie knelt in the center of the circles. Her dark hair was unbound and fell to her waist, a ripple of dark curls against her darker gear. She looked very beautiful in the light that streamed from the skylighted dome above, the scar on her cheek red as a rose. The consul stood above her, her white hands upraised, the mortal cup held within them. Charlotte wore simple scarlet robes that billowed around her. Her small face was serious and severe. Take the cup, Sophia Collins, she said, and the room was breathlessly silent. The council chamber was not full, but the row Tessa sat at the end of was. Gideon and Gabriel, Cecily and Henry, her and Will, all leaning forward eagerly, waiting for Sophie to ascend. At each end of the dais stood a silent brother, their heads bent, their parchment robes looking as if they had been carved out of marble. Charlotte lowered the cup and held it out to Sophie, who took it carefully. Do you swear, Sophia Collins, to forsake the mundane world and follow the path of the Shadow Hunter? Will you take into yourself the blood of the angel Raziel and honor that blood? Do you swear to serve the Clave, to follow the law as set forth by the Covenant, and to obey the word of the Council? Will you defend that which is human and mortal, knowing that for your service there will be no recompense and no thanks but honor? I swear, said Sophie, her voice very steady. Can you be a shield for the weak, a light in the dark, a truth among falsehoods, a tower in the flood, an eye to see when all others are blind? I can. And when you are dead, will you give up your body to the Nephilim to be burned, that your ashes may be used to build the city of bones? I will. Then drink, said Charlotte. Tessa heard Gideon draw in his breath. This was the dangerous part of the ritual. This was the part that could kill the untrained or unworthy. Sophie bent her dark head and set the cup to her lips. Tessa sat forward, her chest tight with apprehension. She felt Will's hand slide over hers, a warm, comforting weight. Sophie's throat moved as she swallowed. The circle that surrounded her and Charlotte flared up once with a cold blue-white light, obscuring them both. When it faded, Tessa was left blinking stars from her eyes as the light dwindled. She blinked hastily and saw Sophie hold up the cup. There was a glow about the cup she held as she handed it back to Charlotte, who smiled broadly. "You are Nephilim now," she said. "I name you Sophia Shadowhunter, of the blood of Jonathan Shadowhunter, child of the Nephilim. Arise, Sophia." And Sophie rose amid the cheering of the crowd, Gideon's cheers the loudest among many. Sophie was smiling, her whole face shining in the winter sunlight that gleamed down through the clear skylight. Shadows moved across the floor, darting and quick. Tessa looked up in wonder. Whiteness streaked the windows, swirling gently beyond the glass. "Snow," Will said softly in her ear. "Merry Christmas, Tessa." That night was the night of the Enclave's annual Christmas party. It was the first time Tessa had seen the great ballroom at the Institute thrown open and filled with people. The enormous windows glowed with reflected light, casting a golden sheen across the polished floor. Beyond the dark glass, one could see the snow falling in great soft white flakes, but inside the Institute all was warm and golden and secure. Christmas among Shadowhunters was not Christmas as Tessa had come to know it. There were no Advent wreaths, no carols sung, no Christmas crackers. There was a tree, though it was not decorated in the traditional fashion. A massive fir, it rose to nearly touch the ceiling at the far end of the ballroom. When Will asked Charlotte how on earth it had gotten there, she had only waved her hands and said something about Magnus. Candles balanced on each branch, though Tessa could not see how they were fastened or supported. They cast even more golden light over the room. Tied to the branches of the tree, and dangling from sconces, from the candelabras on tables, the knobs of doors, were crystalline glittering runes, each one as clear as glass, yet refracting light, throwing glimmering rainbows through the room. The walls were decorated with intertwined wreaths of holly and ivy, the red berries glowing against the green leaves. Here and there were white-berried sprigs of mistletoe. There was even one tied to the collar of Church, who was hovering under one of the Christmas tables and looking furious. Tessa didn't think she'd ever seen so much food. The tables were laden with carved chicken and turkey, game birds and hare, Christmas hams and pies, wafer-thin sandwiches, ices and truffles and blancmanges and cream puddings, jewel-coloured jellies, tipsy cake and Christmas puddings flamed with brandy, iced sherbet, mulled wine, and great silver bowls containing Bishop Christmas punch. There were horns of plenty spilling treats and candies, and St. Nicholas's bags, each containing a lump of coal, a bit of sugar, or a lemon drop, to tell the receiver whether their behaviour that year had been mischievous, sweet or sour. There had been tea and presents earlier, just for the inhabitants of the Institute, the group of them exchanging their gifts before the guests arrived. Charlotte balanced on Henry's lap as he sat in the rolling chair, opening gift after gift for the baby, due to arrive in April, whose name, it had been decided, was going to be Charles. "Charles Fairchild," Charlotte said proudly, holding up the small blanket that Sophie had knitted for her, with a neat CF in the corner. "Charles Buford Fairchild," Henry had corrected. Charlotte had made a face. Tessa, laughing, had asked, "Fairchild? Not Bramwell?" Charlotte had given a shy smile. "I am the consul. It has been decided that in this case, the child will take my name. Henry doesn't mind. Do you, Henry?" "Not at all," Henry had said, "especially as Charles Buford Bramwell would have sounded rather silly, but Charles Buford Fairchild has an excellent ring to it." "Henry." Tessa smiled now at the memory. She was standing near the Christmas tree, watching the members of the Enclave in all their finery. Women in the deep jewel tones of winter, dresses of red satin and sapphire silk and gold taffeta, men in elegant evening dress, as they milled and laughed. Sophie stood with Gideon, glowing and relaxed in an elegant green velvet gown. There was Cecily in blue, dashing here and there, delighted to be looking at everything, and Gabriel following her, all long limbs and tousled hair and adoring amusement. A massive Yule log, wound round with wreaths of ivy and holly, burned in the enormous stone fireplace, and hanging above the fireplace were nets containing golden apples, walnuts, coloured popcorn and candies. There was music, too, soft and haunting, and Charlotte seemed finally to have found a use for Bridget's singing, for it rose above the sound of the instruments, lilting and sweet. Alas, my love, ye do me wrong, to cast me off discourteously, and I have loved you so long, delighting in your company. Greensleeves was all my joy, Greensleeves was my delight, Greensleeves was my heart of gold, and who but Lady Greensleeves? Let the sky rain potatoes, said a musing voice. Let it thunder to the tune of Greensleeves. Tessa started and turned. Will had appeared somehow at her elbow, which was vexing, as she had been looking for him since she had come into the room and seen no sign of him. As always, the sight of him in evening dress, all blue and black and white, took her breath away, but she hid the hitch in her chest with a smile. Shakespeare, she said. The Merry Wives of Windsor. Not one of the better plays, Will said, narrowing his blue eyes as he took her in. Tessa had chosen to wear rose-coloured silk that night, and no jewellery save a velvet ribbon, wrapped twice about her throat and hanging down her back. Sophie had done her hair, as a favour now, not as a lady's maid, and woven small white berries in among the upswept curls. Tessa felt very fancy and conspicuous, though it has its moments. Always a literary critic, Tessa sighed, gazing away from him, across the room, to where Charlotte was in a conversation with a tall, fair-haired man Tessa did not recognize. Will leaned in toward her. He smelled faintly of something green and wintry, fir or lime or cypress. Those are mistletoe berries in your hair, he said, his breath ghosting across her cheek. Technically, I believe that means anyone can kiss you at any time. She widened her eyes at him. Do you think they're likely to try? He touched her cheek lightly. He was wearing white chamois gloves, but she felt as if it were his skin on hers. I'd kill anyone who did. Well, Tessa said, it wouldn't be the first time you did something scandalous at Christmas. Will paused for a moment and then grinned, that rare grin of his that lit up his face and changed the whole nature of it. It was a smile Tessa had worried once was gone forever, gone with Jem down into the darkness of the silent city. Jem was not dead, but some bit of Will had gone with him when he'd left, some bit chiselled out of Will's heart and buried down there among the whispering bones. And Tessa had worried for that first week just after that Will would not recover, that he would always be a sort of ghost, wandering about the institute, not eating, always turning to speak to someone who was not there, the light in his face dying as he remembered and fell silent. But she had been determined. Her own heart had been broken, but to mend Will's, she was sure, would mean to mend her own somehow. As soon as she'd been strong enough, she had set herself to bring him some tea he did not want, and books that he did, and harried him in and out of the library, and demanded his help with training. She told Charlotte to stop treating him like glass that would break, and to send him out into the city to fight, as he had been sent before with Gabriel or Gideon instead of Jem. And Charlotte had done it, uneasily, but Will had come back from them bloody and bruised, but with his eyes alive and alight. That was clever, Cecily had said to her later, as they stood by the window, watching Will and Gabriel talking in the courtyard. Being Nephilim gives my brother a purpose. Shadow hunting will mend the cracks in him. Shadow hunting, and you. Tessa had let the curtain fall closed, thoughtfully. She and Will had not spoken of what had happened in Cadair Idris, the night they had spent together. Indeed, it seemed a distant dream. It was like something that had happened to another person, not her, not Tessa. She did not know if Will felt the same way. She knew Jem had known, or guessed, and forgave them both, but Will had not approached her again, not said he loved her, not asked if she loved him since the day Jem had left. It seemed that endless ages went by, though it was only about a fortnight before Will came and found her alone in the library and asked her, rather abruptly, if she would go for a carriage ride with him the next day. Puzzled, Tessa had agreed, privately wondering if there was some other reason he wanted her company. A mystery to investigate. A confession to make. But no, it had been a simple carriage ride through the park. The weather had been growing colder, and ice was rimming the edges of the ponds. The bare branches of the trees were bleak and lovely, and Will made polite conversation with her about the weather and city landmarks. He seemed determined to take up where Jem had left off her London education. They went to the British Museum and the National Gallery, to Kew Gardens and to St. Paul's Cathedral, where Tessa finally lost her temper. They'd been standing in the famous Whispering Gallery, Tessa leaning on the railing and gazing down into the cathedral below. Will was translating the Latin inscription on the wall of the crypt where Christopher Wren was buried. If you seek his monument, look about you. When Tessa absently reached to slip her hand into his, he immediately drew back, flushing. She looked at him in surprise. Is something wrong? No, he said, too quickly. I did not bring you here that I might maul you in the Whispering Gallery. Tessa exploded. I'm not asking you to maul me in the Whispering Gallery. By the angel, Will, would you stop being so polite? He looked at her in amazement. But wouldn't you rather? I would not rather. I don't want you to be polite. I want you to be Will. I don't want you to indicate points of architectural interest to me, as if you were a Baedeker guide. I want you to say dreadfully mad, funny things, and make up songs and be the Will I fell in love with, she almost said. And be Will, she finished instead, or I shall hit you with my umbrella. I'm trying to court you, Will said in exasperation. Court you properly. That's what all this has been about. You know that, don't you? Mr. Rochester never courted Jane Eyre, Tessa pointed out. No, he dressed up as a woman and terrified the poor girl out of her wits. Is that what you want? You would make a very ugly woman. I would not. I would be stunning. Tessa laughed. There, she said. There is Will. Isn't that better? Don't you think so? I don't know, Will said, eyeing her. I'm afraid to answer that. I've heard that when I speak it makes American women wish to strike me with umbrellas. Tessa laughed again, and they were both laughing, their smothered giggles bouncing off the walls of the Whispering Gallery. After that, things were decidedly easier between them, and Will's smile, when he helped her down from the carriage on their return, was bright and real. That night there had been a soft tap on Tessa's door, and when she had gone to open it, she had found nobody there, only a book resting on the corridor floor. A Tale of Two Cities. An odd present, she had thought. There was a copy of the book in the library, which she could read as often as she wanted, but this one was brand new, with a receipt from Hatchett's, marking the title page. It was only when she took it to bed with her that she realized that there was an inscription on the title page as well. Tess. Tess. Tessa. Was there ever a more beautiful sound than your name? To speak it aloud makes my heart ring like a bell. Strange to imagine that, isn't it? A heart ringing. But when you touch me, that is what it is like. As if my heart is ringing in my chest, and the sound shivers down my veins and splinters my bones with joy. Why have I written these words in this book? Because of you. You taught me to love this book, where I had scorned it. When I read it for the second time, with an open mind and heart, I feel the most complete despair and envy of Sidney Carton. Yes, Sidney. For even if he had no hope that the woman he loved would love him, at least he could tell her of his love. At least he could do something to prove his passion, even if that thing was to die. I would have chosen death for a chance to tell you the truth, Tessa, if I could have been assured that death would be my own. And that is why I envied Sidney, for he was free. And now, at last, I am free, and I can finally tell you, without fear of danger to you, all that I feel in my heart. You are not the last dream of my soul. You are the first dream, the only dream I ever was unable to stop myself from dreaming.
You are the first dream of my soul, and from that dream I hope will come all other dreams, a lifetime's worth. With hope at last, Will Herondale.
She had sat up for a long time after that, holding the book without reading it, watching the dawn come up over London. In the morning, she had fairly flown to get dressed, before she seized up the book and dashed downstairs with it. She caught Will coming out of his bedroom, hair still damp from the picture, and hurled herself at him, catching his lapels and pulling him to her, burying her face in his chest. The book thumped to the floor between him, as he reached to hold her, smoothing her hair down her back, whispering softly, "Tessa, what is it? What's wrong? Did you not like—" "No one has ever written me anything so beautiful," she said, her face pressed against his chest, the soft beat of his heart steady beneath his shirt and jacket. "Not ever. I wrote it just after I discovered the curse was false," Will said. "I had meant to give it to you, but—" His hand tightened in her hair. "When I found out you were engaged to Jem, I put it away. I did not know when I should give it to you. And then yesterday, when you wanted me to be myself, I had hope enough to take out those old dreams again, to dust them off, and give them to you." They went to the park that day, though it was as cold as it was bright, and there were not many people about. The Serpentine was bright under the wintry sun, and Will pointed out the place where he and Jem had fed poultry pies to the mallards. It was the first time she saw him smile while talking about Jem. She knew she could not be Jem for Will. No one could. But slowly, the hollow places in his heart were filling in. Having Cecily about was a joy for Will. Tessa could see that when they sat together before the fire, speaking Welsh softly, and his eyes glowed. He'd even grown to like Gabriel and Gideon, and they were friends for him, though no one could be a friend as Jem had been. And of course, Charlotte's and Henry's love was as steadfast as ever. The wound would never go away, Tessa knew, not for herself and not for Will either, but as the weather grew colder, and Will smiled more and ate more regularly, and the haunted look faded from his eyes, she began to breathe more easily, knowing that look was not a mortal one. He said now, rocking back in his heels slightly as he surveyed the ballroom floor. "You may be right. I think it was around about Christmas when I got my Welsh dragon tattoo." At that, Tessa had tried very hard not to blush. "How did that happen?" Will made an airy gesture with his hand. "I was drunk." "Nonsense. You were never really drunk." "On the contrary, in order to learn how to pretend to be inebriated, one must become inebriated at least once, as a reference point. Six-fingered Nigel had been at the mulled cider." "You can't mean there's truly a six-fingered Nigel." "Of course there is," Will began with a grin, which suddenly faded. He was looking past Tessa, out at the ballroom. She turned to follow his gaze and saw the same tall, fair-haired man who had been talking to Charlotte earlier, shouldering his way through the crowd toward them. He was stocky, perhaps in his late 30s, with a scar that ran along his jaw. Tousled fairish hair and blue eyes, and skin tanned by the sun. It looked even darker against his starched white shirt front. There was something familiar about him, something that teased at the edges of Tessa's memories. He came to a stop in front of them. His eyes flicked to Will. They were a paler blue than Will's, almost the colour of cornflowers. The skin around them was tanned and lined with faint crow's feet. He said, "You are William Herondale?" Will nodded without speaking. "I am Elias Carstairs," the man said. "Jem Carstairs was my nephew." Will turned white, and Tessa realized what it was about the man that seemed familiar. There was something about him, something about the way he carried himself and the shape of his hands, that reminded her of Jem. Since Will seemed unable to speak, Tessa said, "Yes, this is Will Herondale, and I am Teresa Gray." "The shape-changer girl," said the man. "Elias," Tessa reminded herself. Shadow hunters used each other's given names. "You were engaged to James before he became a silent brother." "I was," Tessa said quietly. "I love him very much." He gave her a look, not hostile or challenging, only curious. And then he turned his gaze to Will. "You were his parabatai." Will found his voice.
I am still, he said, and set his jaw stubbornly. James spoke of you, said Elias. After I left China, when I returned to Idris, I asked if he would come and live with me. We had sent him away from Shanghai, considering it unsafe for him there while Yen Lo's minions ran free, still seeking vengeance. But when I asked him if he would come to me in Idris, he said no, he could not. I asked him to reconsider, told him I was his family, his blood, but he said he could not leave his parabatai, that there were some things more important than blood. Elias's light blue eyes were steady. I have brought you a gift, Will Herondale. Something I intended to give him when he was of age, because his father no longer lived to give it to him. But I cannot give it to him now. Will was tense all over, a bowstring strung too tight. He said, I have not done anything to deserve a gift. I think you have. Elias drew from the belt at his waist a short sword in an intricate scabbard. He held it out to Will, who, after a moment, took it. The scabbard was covered in intricate designs of leaves and runes, carefully worked, gleaming under the golden light. With a decisive gesture, Will pulled the sword free and held it up in front of his face. The hilt was covered with the same pattern of runes and leaves, but the blade itself was simple and bare, save for a line of words that ran down its center. Tessa leaned in to read the words upon the metal. I am Cortana, of the same steel and temper as Joyeuse and Durandal. Joyeuse was Charlemagne's sword, said Will, his voice still stiff, in that way that Tessa knew now meant that he was forcing down emotion. Durandal was Roland's. This sword it is of legend born, forged by the first shadow hunter weapon maker, Wayland the smith. It is a feather from the wing of the angel in its hilt, said Elias. It has been in the Carstairs family for hundreds of years. I was instructed by Jem's father to give it to him when he reached 18, but the Silent Brothers cannot accept gifts. He looked at Will. You were his parabatai. You should have it. Will slammed the sword back into its scabbard. I cannot take it. I will not. Elias looked stunned. But you must, he said. You were his parabatai, and he loved you. Will held the sword back out toward Elias Carstairs, hilt first. After a moment, Elias took it, and Will turned and walked away, vanishing into the crowd. Elias looked after him in bewilderment. I did not intend to cause offense. You spoke of Jem in the past tense, said Tessa. Jem is not with us, but he is not dead. Will, he cannot bear that Jem be thought of as lost or forgotten. I did not mean to forget him, said Elias. I meant simply that the Silent Brothers do not have emotions like we do. They do not feel as we do. If they love... Jem still loves Will, Tessa said, whether he is a Silent Brother or not. There are things no magic can destroy, for they are magic in themselves. You never saw them together, but I did. I meant to give him Cortana, Elias said. I cannot give it to James, so I thought his parabatai ought to have it. You mean well, Tessa said, but forgive my impertinence, Mr. Carstairs. Do you never mean to have any children of your own? His eyes widened. I had not thought. Tessa looked at the shimmering blade, and then at the man holding it. She could see Jem in him a little, as if she were looking at the reflection of what she loved in rippling water. That love, remembered and present, made her voice gentle when she spoke. If you are not sure, she said, then keep it. Keep it for your own heirs. Will would prefer that, for he does not need a sword to remember Jem by, however illustrious its lineage. It was cold on the Institute steps, cold where Will stood without a coat or hat, looking out into the frost-dusted night. The wind blew tiny drifts of snow against his cheeks, his bare hands, and he heard, as he always did, Jem's voice in the back of his head, telling him not to be ridiculous, to get back inside before he gave himself the flu. Winter had always seemed the purest season to Will. Even the smoke and dirt of London, caught by the chill, frozen hard and clean. That morning he had broken a layer of ice that had formed on his water jug, before splashing the icy fluid onto his face and shivering as he looked in the mirror, his wet hair painting his face in black stripes. First Christmas morning without Jem in 6 years. The purest cold, bringing the purest pain. "Will?" The voice was a whisper, of a very familiar kind. He turned his head, an image of old Molly rising in his mind. But ghosts so rarely strayed from where they had died or were buried, and besides, what would she want with him now? A gaze met his, level and dark. The rest of her was not so much transparent as edged by silver, the blonde hair, the dull pretty face, the white gown she had died in. Blood, red like a flower, on her chest. "Jessamine," he said. "Merry Christmas, Will." His heart, which had stopped for a moment, began to beat again, the blood running fast in his veins. "Jessamine, what are you doing here?" She pouted a little. "I'm here because I died here," she said, her voice growing in strength. It was not unusual for a ghost to achieve a greater solidity and auditory power when they were close to a human, especially one who could hear them. She indicated the courtyard at their feet, where Will had held her in the dying moments, her blood running onto the flagstones. "Are you not pleased to see me, Will?" "Should I be?" he said. "Jessie, usually when I see ghosts, it is because there is some unfinished business or some sorrow that holds them to this world." She raised her head, looking up at the snow. Though it fell all around her, she was untouched by it, as if she stood under glass. "And if I had sorrow, would you help me cure it? You never cared for me much in life." "I did," Will said. "I am truly sorry if I gave you the impression that I cared nothing for you, or hated you, Jessamine. I think you reminded me more of myself than I wish to admit, and therefore I judged you with the same harshness I would have judged myself." At that, she did look at him. "Why? Was that straightforward honesty, Will? How you have changed." She took a step back, and he saw that her feet made no impression in the dusting of snow on the steps. "I am here because in life I did not wish to be a shadow hunter, to guard the Nephilim. I am charged now with the guard of the Institute, for as long as it needs guarding." "And you do not mind," he asked, "being here, with us, when you could have passed over?" She wrinkled her nose. "I did not care to pass over. So much was demanded of me in life, the angel knows what it might be like afterwards. No, I'm happy here, watching you all, quiet and drifting and unseen." Her silvery hair shone in the moonlight as she inclined her head toward him. "Though you are near to driving me mad." "I?" "Indeed. I always said you would be a dreadful suitor, Will, and you are nigh on proving it." "Truly," Will said, "you've come back from death like the ghost of old Marley, but to nag me about my romantic prospects." "What prospects?" "You've taken Tessa on so many carriage rides. I'd wager she could draw a map of London from memory, but have you proposed to her? You have not. A lady cannot propose to herself, William, and she cannot tell you she loves you if you do not state your intentions." Will shook his head. "Jessamine, you are incorrigible." "I am also right," she pointed out. "What is it you are afraid of?" "That if I do state my intentions, she will say she does not love me back, not the way she loved Jem." "She will not love you as she loved Jem. She will love you as she loves you, Will, an entirely different person. Do you wish that she had not loved Jem?" "No, but neither do I wish to marry someone who does not love me." "You must ask her to find that out," said Jessamine. "Life is full of risks. Death is much simpler." "Why have I not seen you before tonight, when you have been here all this time?" he asked. "I cannot enter the Institute yet, and when you are out in the courtyard, you are always with someone else. I have tried to go through the doors, but a sort of force prevents me. It's better than it was. At first I could go only a few steps. Now I am as you see me." She indicated her position on the stairs. One day I shall be able to go inside. And when you do, you shall find that your room is as it ever was, and your dolls as well," said Will. Jessamine smiled a smile that made Will wonder if she had always been so sad, or if death had changed her more than he had thought ghosts could be changed. Before he could speak again, though, a look of alarm crossed her face, and she vanished within a swirl of snow. Will turned to see what had frightened her off. The doors of the Institute had opened, and Magnus had emerged. He wore an astrakhan wool greatcoat, and his tall silk hat was already being spotted by the falling snowflakes. "I should have known I'd find you out here, doing your best to turn yourself into an icicle," Magnus said, descending the steps until he stood beside Will, looking at the courtyard. Will did not feel like mentioning Jessamine. Somehow, he thought, she would not have wanted him to. "Were you leaving the party, or just looking for me?" "Both," Magnus said, pulling on a pair of white gloves. "In fact, I am leaving London." "Leaving London?" Will said in dismay. "You can't mean that." "Why wouldn't I?" Magnus flicked a finger at an errant snowflake. It sparked blue and vanished. "I am not a Londoner, Will. I've been stopping with Woolsey for some time, but his home is not my home, and Woolsey and I wear out each other's company after not much duration." "Where will you go?" "New York, the new world, a new life, a new continent." Magnus threw his hands up. "I may even take your cat with me. Charlotte says he's been mourning since Jem left." "Well, he bites everyone. You're welcome to him." "Do you think he'll like New York?" "Who knows? We'll find out together. The unexpected is what keeps me from stagnating. Those of us who do not live forever do not like change, perhaps as much as those of you who do." "I'm tired of losing people," Will said. "So am I," Magnus said. "But it is as I said, isn't it? You learn to bear it." "I have heard sometimes that men who lose an arm or a leg still feel the pain in those limbs, though they are gone," said Will. "It is like that sometimes. I can feel Jem with me, though he is gone, and it is like I am missing a part of myself." "But you are not," Magnus said. "He's not dead, Will. He lives because you let him go. He would have stayed with you and died if you'd asked it. But you loved him enough to prefer that he live, even if that life is separate from yours. And that, above all things, proves that you're not Sidney Carton, Will, that yours is not the kind of love that can be redeemed only through destruction. It is what I saw in you, what I've always seen in you, what made me want to help you, that you are not despairing, that you have in you an infinite capacity for joy." He put one gloved hand under Will's chin and lifted Will's face. There were not many people Will had to raise his head to look in the eye, but Magnus was one. "Bright star," Magnus said, and his eyes were thoughtful, as if he were remembering something or someone. "Those of you who are mortal, you burn so fiercely, and you, fiercer than most, Will. I will not ever forget you." "Nor I you," said Will. "I owe you a great deal. You broke my curse. You were not cursed." "Yes, I was," Will said. "I was. Thank you, Magnus, for all you did for me. If I did not say it before, I am saying it now. Thank you." Magnus dropped his hand. "I don't think a shadow hunter has ever thanked me before." Will smiled crookedly. "I would not try to become too accustomed to it. We're not a thankful sort." "No," Magnus laughed. "No, I won't." His bright cat eyes narrowed. "I leave you in good hands, I think, Will Herondale." "You mean Tessa?" "I do mean Tessa. Or do you deny that she holds your heart?" Magnus had begun to descend the stairs. He paused and looked back at Will. "I do not," Will said. "But she will be sorry that you have left without saying goodbye to her." "Oh," Magnus said, turning at the bottom of the steps with a curious smile. "I don't think that will be necessary. Tell her I will see her again." Will nodded. Magnus turned away, hands in the pockets of his coat, and began to walk toward the gates of the Institute.
Will watched until his retreating figure faded into the whiteness of the falling snow. Tessa had slipped out of the ballroom without anyone noticing. Even the usually keen-eyed Charlotte was distracted, sitting beside Henry in his wheeled chair, her hand in his, smiling at the antics of the musicians. It did not take Tessa long to find Will. She had guessed where he would be, and she was correct, standing on the front steps of the Institute, without a coat or hat, letting the snow fall on his head and shoulders. There was a white dusting of it all over the courtyard, like icing sugar, frosting the line of carriages waiting there, the black iron gates, the flagstones upon which Jessamine had died. Will was staring intently ahead of him, as if trying to discern something through the descending flakes. "Will," Tessa said, and he turned up to look at her. She had caught up a silk wrap, but nothing heavier, and she felt the cool sting of snowflakes against the bare skin of her neck and shoulders. "I should have been more polite to Elias Carstairs," Will said, by way of reply. He was looking up at the sky, where a pale crescent of moon darted in between the thick sweeps of cloud and fog. Flakes of white snow had fallen and mixed with his black hair. His cheeks and lips were flushed with the cold. He looked more handsome than she had ever remembered him. Instead, I behaved as I would have before. Tessa knew what he meant. For Will there was only one before and after. "You are allowed to have a temper," she said. "I've told you before, I do not want you to be perfect, only to be Will, who will never be perfect." "Perfect is dull," Tessa said, descending the last step to stand beside him. "They're playing Complete the Poetic Quotation inside now. You could have made quite a showing. I do not think there is anyone who could challenge your knowledge of literature, other than you. I would be difficult competition indeed. Perhaps we could make ourselves a team of sorts, and divide the winnings." "That seems bad form." Will spoke absently, tilting back his head now. The snow circled whitely about them, as if they stood at the bottom of a whirlpool. "Today, when Sophie ascended." "Yes? Is that something that you would have wanted?" He turned to look at her, white snowflakes caught in his dark lashes. "For yourself?" "You know that isn't possible for me, Will. I am a warlock, or at least, that is the closest approximation of what I am. I cannot ever be fully Nephilim." "I know." He looked down at his hands, opening his fingers to let snowflakes settle, melting, on his palms. "But in Cad Idris, you said that you hoped to be a shadow hunter, that Mortmain had dashed those hopes." "I did feel that way, at the time," she allowed. "But when I became ethereal, when I changed and destroyed Mortmain, how could I hate something that allowed me to protect the ones I care about? It is not easy to be different, and even less so to be unique. But I begin to think I was never meant for an easy road." Will laughed. "The easy road, no, not for you, my Tessa." "Am I your Tessa?" She drew her wrap closer around herself, pretending her shiver was just the cold. "Are you bothered by what I am, Will? That I am not like you?" The words hung between them, unspoken. "There is no future for a shadow hunter who dallies with warlocks." Will paled. "Those things I said on the roof, so long ago. You know I did not mean them." "I know. I do not wish you other than you are, Tessa. You are what you are, and I love you. I do not just love the parts of you that meet with a Clave's approval." She raised her eyebrows. "You are willing to endure the rest?" He raked a hand through his dark, snow-dampened hair. "No, I am misspeaking. There is nothing about you that I can imagine not loving. Do you really think it is so important to me that you be Nephilim? My mother isn't a shadow hunter, and when I saw you change into the angel, when I saw you blaze forth with the fire of heaven, it was glorious, Tess." He took a step toward her. "What you are, what you can do, it is like some great miracle of the earth, like fire or wildflowers, or the breadth of the sea. You are unique in the world, just as you are unique in my heart, and there will never be a time when I do not love you. I would love you
if you were not in any part a shadow hunter at all. She gave him a shaky smile. But I am glad that I am, if only by half, she said, since it means that I may stay with you, here, in the Institute. That the family I have found here can remain my family. Charlotte said if I choose, I could cease to be a Grey and take the name my mother should have had before she was married. I could be a Starkweather. I could have a true shadow hunter name. She heard Will exhale a breath. It came out a puff of white in the cold. His eyes were blue and wide and clear, fixed on her face. He wore the expression of a man who had steeled himself to do a terrifying thing and was carrying it through. Of course you can have a true shadow hunter name, Will said. You can have mine. Tessa stared at him, all black and white against the black and white snow and stone. Your name? Will took a step toward her. They stood face to face. Then he reached to take her hand and slid off her glove, which he put into his pocket. He held her bare hand in his fingers curved around hers. His hand was warm and calloused, and his touch made her shiver. His eyes were steady and blue. They were everything Will was. True and tender, sharp and witty, loving and kind. Marry me, he said. Marry me, Tess. Marry me and be Tessa Herondale, or be Tessa Grey, or whatever you wish to call yourself. But marry me, and stay with me, and never leave me, for I cannot bear another day of my life to go by that does not have you in it. The snow was swirling down around them, white and cold and perfect. The clouds above had parted, and through the gaps she could see the stars. Jem told me what Ragnarfell said about my father, Will went on, that for my father there was only ever one woman he loved, and it was her for him, or nothing. You are that for me. I love you, and I will only ever love you until I die. Will. He bit his lip. His hair was thick with snow, his lashes starred with flakes. Was that too grand a statement? Did I frighten you? You know how I am with words. Oh, I do. I recall what you said to me once, Will went on. That words have the power to change us. Your words have changed me, Tess. They have made me a better man than I would have been otherwise. Life is a book, and there are 1,000 pages I have not yet read. I would read them together with you, as many as I can, before I die. She put her hand against his chest, just over his heart, and felt its beat against her palm, a unique time signature that was all its own. I only wish you would not speak of dying, she said. But even for that, yes, I know how you are with your words. And Will, I love all of them. Every word you say. The silly ones, the mad ones, the beautiful ones, and the ones that are only for me. I love them, and I love you. Will began to speak, but Tessa covered his mouth with her hand. I love your words, my Will. But hold them for a moment, she said, and smiled into his eyes. Think of all the words I have held inside all this time, while I did not know your intentions. When you came to me in the drawing room and told me that you loved me, it was the hardest thing I have ever done to send you away. You said you loved the words of my heart, the shape of my soul. I remember every word you said from that day to this. I will never forget them. There are so many words I wish to say to you, and so many I wish to hear you say to me. I hope we have all our lives to say them to each other. Then you will marry me, Will said, looking dazed, as if he did not quite believe in his good fortune. Yes, she said, the last, the simplest and most important word of all. And Will, who had words for every occasion, opened his mouth and closed it on silence, and instead reached for her to pull her against him. Her wrap fell onto the stairs, but his arms were warm around her, and his mouth hot against hers, as he slanted his head down to kiss her. He tasted like snowflakes and wine, like winter and Will and London. His mouth was soft against hers, his hands in her hair, scattering white berries across the stone steps. Tessa held fast to Will as the snow swirled around them. Through the windows of the Institute, she could hear the faint sound of the music playing in the ballroom. The pianoforte, the cello, and rising above it all, like sparks leaping toward the sky, the sweet, celebratory strains of the violin. "I can't believe we're really going home," Cecily said. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she was bouncing up and down in her white kid boots. She was bundled into a red winter coat, the brightest thing in the dark crypt, except the portal itself, great and silver and shining against the far wall. Through it, Tessa could catch a glimpse, like a glimpse in a dream of blue sky. The sky outside the Institute was a spitting London grey, and snow-dusted hills. Will stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. He looked pale and nervous, and she longed to take his hand. "We're not going home, Ceci," he said. "Not to stay. We're visiting. I wish to introduce our parents to my fiancée." And at that his pallor faded slightly, his lips curving into a smile, "that they might know the girl I am going to marry." "Oh, pish-tosh," said Cecily. "We can use the portal to see them whenever we want. Charlotte is the consul, so we cannot possibly get in trouble." Charlotte groaned. "Cecily, this is a singular expedition. It is not a toy. You cannot simply use the portal whenever you like, and this excursion must be kept a secret. None but we here can know you visited your parents, that I allowed you to break the law." "I won't tell anyone," Cecily protested. "And neither will Gabriel." She glanced at the boy at her side. "You won't, will you?" "Why are we bringing him along again?" Will inquired, of the world in general as well as his sister. Cecily put her hands on her hips. "Why are you bringing Tessa?" "Because Tessa and I are going to be married," Will said, and Tessa smiled. The way that Will's little sister could ruffle his feathers like no one else was still amusing to her. "Well, Gabriel and I might well be married," Cecily said. "Someday." Gabriel made a choking noise and turned an alarming shade of purple. Will threw up his hands. "You can't be married, Cecily. You're only 15. When I get married, I'll be 18, an adult." Cecily did not look impressed. "We may have a long engagement," she said, "but I cannot see why you're counselling me to marry a man my parents have never met." Will sputtered. "I'm not counselling you to marry a man your parents have never met." "Then we are in agreement. Gabriel must meet Mum and Dad." Cecily turned to Henry. "Is the portal ready?" Tessa leaned close to Will. "I do love the way she manages you," she whispered. "It is quite entertaining to watch." "Wait until you meet my mother," Will said, and slipped his hand into hers. His fingers were cold. His heart must have been racing. Tessa knew he had been up all night. The idea of seeing his parents after so many years was as terrifying to him as it was joyful. She knew that admixture of hope and fear infinitely worse than just one alone. "The portal is quite ready," said Henry. "And remember, in an hour I shall open it again, that you may return through it." "And understand this is just this once," Charlotte said anxiously. "Even if I am the consul, I cannot allow you to visit your mundane family." "Not even at Christmas," said Cecily, with large, tragic eyes. Charlotte weakened visibly. "Well, perhaps Christmas." "And birthdays," said Tessa. "Birthdays are special." Charlotte put her hands over her face. "Oh, by the angel." Henry laughed and swept an arm toward the door. "Go on through," he said, and Cecily went first, vanishing through the portal as if she had stepped through a waterfall. Gabriel followed, and then Will and Tessa, holding tightly to each other's hands. Tessa concentrated on the warmth of Will's hand, the pulse of blood through his skin, as the cold and darkness took them, whirling them about for breathless, ageless moments. Lights burst behind her eyes, and she emerged from the darkness suddenly, blinking and stumbling. Will caught her to him, keeping her from falling. They were standing on the wide curved drive in front of Ravenscar Manor. Tessa had seen the place only from above, when she and Jem and Will had visited Yorkshire together
not realizing that Will's family inhabited the house now. She recalled that the manor was held in the cup of a valley, with hills sweeping up on either side, covered in gorse and heather, patched now with a dusting of snow. The trees had been green then, they were leafless now, and from the dark slate roof of the manor hung sparkling icicles. The door was dark oak, a heavy brass knocker set in the centre. Will looked at his sister, who nodded minutely at him, then squared his shoulders and reached to lift and release it. The resultant crash seemed to echo through the valley, and Will swore under his breath. Tessa touched his wrist lightly with her hand. "Be brave," she said. "It's not a duck, is it?" He turned to smile at her, dark hair falling in his eyes, just as the door opened to reveal a neatly dressed parlour-maid in a black dress and white mob cap. She took one look at the group on the doorstep, and her eyes widened like saucers. "Miss Cecily," she gasped, and then her eyes went to Will. She clapped her hand over her mouth, turned, and bolted back into the house. "Oh dear," said Tessa. "I have that effect on women," Will said. "I probably should have warned you before you agreed to marry me." "I can still change my mind," Tessa said sweetly. "Don't you dare." He began with a breathless half-laugh, and then suddenly there were people at the door. A tall man, broad-shouldered, with a mass of fair hair streaked with grey and light blue eyes. Just behind him was a woman, slender and startlingly beautiful, with Will and Cecily's ink-black hair and blue eyes as dark as violets. She cried out the moment her gaze fell on Will, and her hands came up, fluttering like white birds startled by a gust of wind. Tessa released Will's hand. He seemed frozen, like a fox when the hounds were almost on him. "Go on," Tessa said softly, and he stepped forward, and then his mother was embracing him, saying, "I knew you'd come back. I knew you would," followed by a torrent of Welsh, of which Tessa could discern only Will's name. Their father was stunned but smiling, holding out his arms for Cecily, who went into them as agreeably as Tessa had ever seen her do anything. For the next few moments, Tessa and Gabriel stood awkwardly on the doorstep, not quite looking at each other, but not quite sure where else to look either. After a long moment, Will drew away from his mother, patting her gently on the shoulder. She laughed, though her eyes were full of tears, and she said something in Welsh that Tessa strongly suspected was a comment on the fact that Will was now taller than she was. "Little mother," he said affectionately, confirming Tessa's suspicions, and he swung around just as his mother's gaze fell on Tessa, and then Gabriel, her eyes widening. "Mom and Dad, this is Teresa Gray. We are engaged to be married next year." Will's mother gave a gasp, though she sounded more surprised than anything else, to Tessa's relief, and Will's father's gaze went immediately to Gabriel, and then to Cecily, his eyes narrowing. "And who is this gentleman?" Will's grin widened. "Oh, him," he said. "This is Cecily's friend, Mr. Gabriel Lightworm." Gabriel, half in the act of stretching out his hand to greet Mr. Herondale, froze in horror. "Lightwood," he spluttered. "Gabriel Lightwood." "Will!" Cecily said, breaking away from her father to glare at her brother. Will looked at Tessa, his blue eyes shining. She opened her mouth to remonstrate with him, to say "Will," as Cecily had just done, but it was too late. She was already laughing. Epilogue. I say the tomb which on the dead is shut opens the heavenly hall, and what we hear, for the end of all things put, is the first step of all. Victor Hugo, A Villequier. London, Blackfriars Bridge, 2008. The wind was sharp, blowing grit and stray rubbish, crisp packets, stray pages of newspaper, old receipts, along the pavement as Tessa, glancing quickly from side to side to check for traffic, dashed across Blackfriars Bridge. To any onlooker she would have looked like an ordinary girl, in her late teens or early 20s, jeans tucked into boots, a blue cashmere top she'd gotten for half off during the January sales, and long brown hair, curling just a bit in the damp weather, tumbling haphazardly down her back. If they were particularly sharp-eyed about fashion, they would have assumed the paisley Liberty print scarf she wore was a knockoff instead of a 100-year-old original, and that the bracelet around her wrist was vintage rather than a gift that had been given to her by her husband on their 30th wedding anniversary. Tessa's steps slowed as she reached one of the stone recesses in the wall of the bridge. Cement benches had been built into them now, so you could sit and look at the grey-green water below sloshing up against the bridge pilings, or at St. Paul's in the distance. The city was alive with noise. The sounds of traffic, honking horns, the rumble of double-decker buses, the ringing of dozens of mobiles, the chatter of pedestrians, the faint sounds of music leaking from white iPod earbuds. Tessa sat down on the bench, pulling her legs up under her. The atmosphere was shockingly clean and clear. The smoke and pollution that had rendered the air yellow and black when she'd been a girl here were gone, and the sky was the colour of a blue-grey marble. The eyesore that had been the Dover and Chatham Railway Bridge was gone too. Only the pilings were still sticking up out of the water as an odd reminder of what had once been. Yellow buoys bobbed in the water now, and tourist boats chugged by, the amplified voices of the tour guides blaring from their speakers. Buses as red as candy hearts sped along the bridge, sending dead leaves fluttering to the curb. She'd glanced down at the watch on her wrist. 5 minutes to noon. She was a little early, but then she always was for this, their yearly meeting. It gave her a chance to think and to remember, and there was no place better for doing either than here, on Blackfriars Bridge, the first place they had ever really talked. Beside the watch was the pearl bracelet she always wore. She never took it off. Will had given it to her when they had been married 30 years, smiling as he'd fastened it on. He had had grey in his hair then, she knew, though she had never really seen it. As if her love had given him his own shape-shifting ability, no matter how much time had passed, when she looked at him, she saw always the wild, black-haired boy that she had fallen in love with. It still seemed incredible to her, sometimes, that they had managed to grow old together, herself and Will Herondale, whom Gabriel Lightwood had once said would not live to be older than 19. They had been good friends with the Lightwoods, too, through all those years. Of course, Will could hardly not be friends with the man who was married to his sister. Both Cecily and Gabriel had seen Will on the day he died, as had Sophie, though Gideon had himself passed away several years before. Tessa remembered that day clearly, the day the Silent Brothers had said there was nothing more they could do to keep Will alive. He had been unable to leave their bed by then. Tessa had squared her shoulders and gone to give the news to their family and friends, trying to be as calm for them as she could, though her heart had felt as if it were being ripped out of her body. It had been June, the bright hot summer of 1937, and with the curtains thrown back, the bedroom had been full of sunlight. Sunlight and her and Will's children, their grandchildren, their nieces and nephews, Ceci's blue-eyed boys, tall and handsome, and Gideon and Sophie's 2 girls. And those who were as close as family, Charlotte, white-haired and upright, and the Fairchild sons and daughters with their curling red hair like Henry's had once been. All day Tessa had sat on the bed with Will beside her, leaning on her shoulder. The sight might have been strange to others, a young woman lovingly cradling a man who looked old enough to be her grandfather, her hands looped through his. But to their family, it was only familiar. It was only Tessa and Will. And because it was Tessa and Will, the others came and went all day, as shadow hunters did at a deathbed, telling stories of Will's life and all the things he and Tessa had done through their long years together. The children had spoken fondly of the way he had always loved their mother, fiercely and devotedly, the way he had never had eyes for anyone else, and how their parents had set the model for the sort of love they hoped to find in their own lives. They spoke of his regard for books, and how he had taught them all to love them too, to respect the printed page, and cherish the stories that those pages held. They spoke of the way he still cursed in Welsh when he dropped something, though he rarely used the language otherwise, and of the fact that though his prose was excellent, He had written several histories of the Shadowhunters when he'd retired that had been very well respected. His poetry had always been awful, though that had never stopped him from reciting it. Their oldest child, James, had spoken laughingly about Will's unrelenting fear of ducks and his continual battle to keep them out of the pond at the family home in Yorkshire. Their grandchildren had reminded him of the song about demon pox he had taught them when they were much too young, Tess had always thought, and that they had all memorized. They sang it all together and out of tune, scandalizing Sophie. With tears running down her face, Cecily had reminded him of the moment at her wedding to Gabriel when he had delivered a beautiful speech praising the groom, at the end of which he had announced, "Dear God, I thought she was marrying Gideon. I take it all back," thus vexing not only Cecily and Gabriel, but Sophie as well. And Will, though too tired to laugh, had smiled at his sister and squeezed her hand. They'd all laughed about his habit of taking Tessa on romantic holidays, to places from Gothic novels, including the hideous moor where someone had died, a draughty castle with a ghost in it, and of course the square in Paris in which he had decided Sidney Carton had been guillotined, where Will had horrified passers-by by shouting, "I can see the blood on the cobblestones!" in French. At the end of the day, as the sky had darkened, the family had come around Will's bed and kissed him each in turn and left one by one, until Will and Tessa were alone together. Tessa had lain down beside him and slid her arm beneath his head and put her head on his chest, listening to the ever-weakening beat of his heart. And in the shadows they'd whispered, reminding each other of the stories only they knew. Of the girl who had hit over the head with a water jug, the boy who had come to rescue her, and how he had fallen in love with her in that instant. Of a ballroom and a balcony, and the moon sailing like a ship untethered through the sky. Of the flutter of the wings of a clockwork angel. Of the holy water and blood. Near midnight, the door had opened and Jem had come in. Tessa supposed she would have thought of him as Brother Zachariah by then, but neither Will nor Tessa had ever called him that. He had come in like a shadow in his white robes, and Tessa had taken a deep breath when she had seen him, for she had known that this is what Will had been waiting for, and that the hour was now. He did not come to Will at once, but crossed the room to a rosewood box that sat upon the top of the dresser. They had always kept Jem's violin for him, as Will had promised. It was kept clean and in order, and the hinges of the box did not creak as Jem opened it and lifted the instrument out. They watched as he rosined the bow with his familiar slim fingers, his pale wrists disappearing down into the paler material of the brothers' parchment robes. He lifted the violin to his shoulder then, and raised the bow. And he played. Je yin, Jem had told her once that it meant understanding music, and also a bond that went deeper than friendship. Jem played, and he played the years of Will's life as he had seen them. He played two little boys in a training room, one showing the other how to throw knives, and he played the ritual of Parabatai, the fire and the vows, and the burning runes. He played two young men running through the streets of London in the dark, stopping to lean up against a wall and laugh together. He played the day in the library when he and Will had jested with Tessa about ducks, and he played the train to Yorkshire, on which Jem had said that Parabatai were meant to love each other as they loved their own souls. He played that love, and he played their love for Tessa, and hers for them. And he played Will saying, "In your eyes I have always found grace." He played the too few times he had seen them since he had joined the Brotherhood, the brief meetings at the Institute, the time when Will had been bitten by a shax demon and nearly died, and Jem had come from the Silent City and sat with him all night, risking discovery and punishment. And he played the birth of their first son, and the protection ceremony that had been carried out on the child in the Silent City. Will would have no other silent brother but Jem perform it. And Jem played the way he had covered his scarred face with his hands and turned away when he'd found out that the child's name was James. He played of love and loss and years of silence, words unsaid and vows unspoken. and all the spaces between his heart and theirs. And when he was done, and he'd set the violin back in its box, Will's eyes were closed, but Tessa's were full of tears. Jem set down his bow and came toward the bed, drawing back his hood so she could see his closed eyes and his scarred face. And he had sat down beside them, on the bed, and taken Will's hand, the one that Tessa was not holding, and both Will and Tessa had heard Jem's voice in their minds. "I take your hand, brother, so that you may go in peace." Will had opened the blue eyes that had never lost their colour over all the passing years, and looked at Jem and then Tessa, and smiled, and died, with Tessa's head on his shoulder and his hand in Jem's. It never had stopped hurting, remembering when Will had died. After he was gone, Tessa had fled. Her children were grown, had children of their own. She told herself that they did not need her, and hid in the back of her mind the thought that haunted her. She could not bear to remain and watch them grow older than she was. It had been one thing to survive the death of her husband. To survive the death of her children, she could not sit by and watch it. It would happen, must happen, but she would not be there. And besides, there was something Will had asked her to do. The road that led from Shrewsbury to Welshpool was no longer as it had been when Will had ridden across it in a mad, heedless dash to save her from Mortmain. Will had left instructions, details, descriptions of towns, of a certain spreading oak tree. She had puttered up and down the road several times in her Morris Minor before she'd found it. The tree, just as he had drawn it in the journal he had given her, his hand shaking a little but his memory clear. The dagger was there among the roots of the trees, which had grown around the hilt. She had had to cut some of them away and dig at the dirt and rocks with the trowel before she could free it. Jem's blade, stained dark now with weather and the passage of time. She had brought it to Jem that year on the bridge. It was 1937, and the Blitz had not yet come to level the buildings around St. Paul's, to strafe the sky with red fire and burn the walls of the city Tessa loved. Still, there was a shadow over the world, the hint of a coming darkness. "They kill each other, and we can do nothing," Tessa had said, her hands on the worn stone of the bridge parapet. She was thinking of the Great War, of the spendthrift waste of life, not a Shadowhunter war, but out of blood and war were demons born, and it was the responsibility of the Nephilim to keep demons from wreaking even greater destruction. "We cannot save them from themselves," Jem had replied. He wore his hood up, but the wind blew it back, showing her the edge of his scarred cheek. "There is something coming, a horror Mortmain could only have imagined. I feel it in my bones. No one can rid the world of all evil, Tessa." And when she drew his dagger, wrapped in silk, though still dirty and stained with earth and Will's blood, from the pocket of her coat and gave it to him, he bent his head and held it to him, hunching his shoulders over it, as if protecting a wound to his heart. "Will wanted you to see it," she said. "I know you cannot take it with you. Keep it for me. There may come a day." She did not ask him what he meant, but she kept it. Kept it when she left England, the white cliffs of Dover retreating like clouds in the distance as she crossed the Channel. In Paris, she found Magnus, who was living in a garret apartment and painting, an occupation for which he had no aptitude whatsoever. He let her sleep on a mattress by the window, and in the night, when she woke up screaming for Will, he came and put his arms around her, smelling of turpentine. "The first one is always the hardest," he said. "The first?" "The first one you love who dies," he said. "It gets easier after." When the war came to Paris, they went to New York together, and Magnus reintroduced her to the city she had been born in, a busy, bright, buzzing metropolis she barely recognized, where motor cars crowded the streets like ants, and trains whizzed by on elevated platforms. She did not see Jem that year, because the Luftwaffe was strafing London with fire, and he deemed it too dangerous to meet. But in the years after...
Tessa?
Her heart stopped. A great wave of lurching dizziness passed over her, and for a moment she wondered if she were going mad. If after so many years the past and present had blended within her memories until she could no longer tell the difference. For the voice she heard was not the soft, silent voice within her mind of Brother Zachariah, the voice that had echoed in her head once a year for the past 130 years. This was a voice that drew out memories stretched thin by years of recollection, like paper unfolded and refolded too many times. A voice that brought back, like a wave, the memory of another time on this bridge, a night so long ago, everything black and silver, and the river rushing away under her feet. Her heart was pounding so hard, she felt as if it might break through her rib cage. Slowly she turned, away from the balustrade, and stared. He stood on the pavement in front of her, smiling shyly, hands in the pockets of a pair of very modern jeans. He wore a blue cotton jumper pushed up to the elbows. Faint white scars decorated his forearms like lacework. She could see the shape of the rune of quietude, which had been so black and strong against his skin, faded now to a faint imprint of silver.
"Jem?"
she whispered, realizing why she had not seen him when she'd been searching the crowd for him. She'd been looking for Brother Zachariah, wrapped in his parchment white robe, moving unseen through the throng of Londoners. But this was not Brother Zachariah. This was Jem. She couldn't tear her gaze away from him. She had always thought Jem was beautiful. He was no less beautiful to her now. Once he had had silver white hair and eyes like grey skies. This Jem had raven black hair, curling slightly in the humid air, and dark brown eyes, with glints of gold in the irises. Once his skin had been pale, now it had a flush of colour to it. Where his face had been unmarked before he'd become a silent brother, there were two dark scars, the first runes of the Brotherhood, standing out starkly and blackly at the arch of each cheekbone. Where the collar of his jumper dipped slightly, she could see the delicate shape of the Parabatai rune that had once tied him to Will, that might tie them still, if one imagined souls could be tied, even over the divide of death.
"Jem,"
she breathed again. At first glance he looked perhaps 19 years old or 20, a bit older than he had been when he had become a silent brother. When she looked more deeply, she saw a man, the long years of pain and wisdom at the back of his eyes. Even the way he moved spoke of the care of quiet sacrifice. "You are..." Her voice rose with wild hope. "This is permanent? You are not bound to the Silent Brothers anymore?" "No," he said. There was a rapid hitch in his breath. He was looking at her as if he had no idea how she would react to his sudden appearance. "I am not." "The cure? You found it?" "I did not find it myself," he said slowly. "But it was found. I saw Magnus in Alicante a few months ago. We spoke of you. He never said—" "He didn't know," Jem said. "It has been a hard year, a dark year for shadow hunters. But out of the blood and fire, the loss and sorrow, there have been born some great new changes." He held out his arms self-deprecatingly, and with a little amazement in his voice as he said, "I myself am changed." "How?" "I will tell you the story of it, another story of Lightwoods and Herondales and Fairchilds. But it will take more than an hour in telling, and you must be cold." He moved forward as if to touch her shoulder, then seemed to remember himself, and let his hand fall. Words had deserted her. She was still feeling the shock of seeing him like this, bone deep. Yes, she had seen him every year, here in this place, on this bridge. But it was not until this moment that she realized how much she had been seeing a gem transmuted. But this was like falling into her own past, all the last century erased, and she felt dizzy and elated and terrified with it. "But
After today? Where will you go? To Idris? He looked for a moment, honestly bewildered, and despite how old she knew him to be, so young. I don't know, he said. I've never had a lifetime to plan for before. Then, to another institute? Don't go, Tessa wanted to say. Stay. Please. I do not think I will go to Idris, or to an institute anywhere, he said after a pause so long that she felt as if her knees might give way under her if he did not speak. I don't know how to live in the world as a shadow hunter without Will. I don't think I even want to. I am still a Parabatai, but my other half is gone. If I were to go to some institute and ask them to take me in, I would never forget that. I would never feel whole. Then what? That depends on you. On me? A sort of terror gripped her. She knew what she wanted him to say, but it seemed impossible. In all the time she had seen him, since he had become a silent brother, he had seemed remote. Not unkind or unfeeling, but as if there were a layer of glass between him and the world. She remembered the boy she'd known, who had given his love as freely as breathing, but that was not the man she had met only once each year for more than a century. She knew how much the time between then and now had changed her. How much more must it have changed him? She did not know what he wanted from his new life, or, more immediately, from her. She wanted to tell him whatever he wanted to hear, wanted to catch at him and hold him, to seize his hands, and reassure herself of their shape. But she did not dare. Not without knowing what he wanted from her. It had been so many years. How could she presume he still felt as he once had? He looked down at his slender hands gripping the concrete of the bridge. For 130 years, every hour of my life has been scheduled. I thought often of what I would do if I were free, if there were ever a cure found. I thought I would bolt immediately, like a bird released from a cage. I had not imagined I would emerge and find the world so changed, so desperate, subsumed in fire and blood. I wished to survive it, but for only one reason. I wished... What did you wish for? He did not reply. Instead, he reached over to touch her pearl bracelet with light fingers. This is your 30th anniversary bracelet, he said. You still wear it. Tessa swallowed. Her skin was prickling, her pulse racing. She realized she hadn't felt this particular brand of excited nervousness, in so many years that she had nearly forgotten it. Yes. Since Will. Have you never loved anyone else? Don't you know the answer to that? I don't mean the way you love your children, or the way you love your friends. Tessa, you know what I'm asking. I don't, she said. I think I need you to tell me. We were once going to be married, he said. And I have loved you all this time, a century and a half. And I know that you loved Will. I saw you together over the years. And I know that that love was so great that it must have made other loves, even the one we had when we were both so young, seem small and unimportant. You had a whole lifetime of love with him, Tessa. So many years. Children, memories. I cannot hope to... He broke off with a violent start. No, he said, and let her wrist fall. I can't do it. I was a fool to think... Tessa, forgive me, he said, and drew away from her, plunging into the throng of people surging across the bridge. Tessa stood for a moment in shock. It was just a moment, but it was enough time for him to vanish into the crowd. She put out her hand to steady herself. The stone of the bridge was cold under her fingers, cold, just as it had been that night when they had first come to this place, where they had first talked. He had been the first person she had ever voiced her deepest fear to, that her power made her something other, something that was not human. "You are human," he had said, "in all the ways that matter." She remembered him, remembered the lovely dying boy who had taken the time to comfort a frightened girl he did not know, and had not voiced a word of his own fear. Of course, he had left his fingerprints on her heart. How could it be otherwise? She remembered the time he had offered her his mother's jade pendant, held out in his shaking hand. She remembered kisses in a carriage. She remembered walking into his room, spilled full with moonlight, and the silver boy standing in front of the window, ringing music more beautiful than desire out of a violin in his hands. "Will," he had said. "Is it you, Will?" Will. For a moment, her heart hesitated. She remembered when Will had died, her agony, the long nights alone, reaching across the bed every morning when she woke up, for years expecting to find him there, and only slowly growing accustomed to the fact that that side of the bed would always be empty. The moments when she had found something funny and turned to share a joke with him, only to be shocked anew that he was not there. The worst moments, when, sitting alone at breakfast, she had realized that she had forgotten the precise blue of his eyes, or the depth of his laugh. That, like the sound of Jem's violin music, they had faded into the distance where memories are silent. Jem was mortal now. He would grow old, like Will, and like Will he would die, and she did not know if she could bear it again. And yet, most people are lucky to even have one great love in their life. You have found two. Suddenly her feet were moving, almost without her volition. She was darting into the crowd, pushing past strangers, gasping out apologies as she nearly tripped over the feet of passers-by, or knocked into them with her elbows. She didn't care. She was running flat up across the bridge, skidding to a halt at the very end of it, where a series of narrow stone steps led down to the water of the Thames. She took them two at a time, almost slipping on the damp stone. At the bottom of the steps was a small cement dock, ringed around with a metal railing. The river was high and splashed up between the gaps in the metal, filling the small space with the smell of silt and river water. Jem stood at the railing, looking out at the water. His hands were jammed tightly into his pockets, his shoulders hunched, as if against a strong wind. He was staring ahead, almost blindly, and with such fixed intent that he didn't seem to hear her as she came up behind him. She caught at his sleeve, swinging him around to face her. "What?" she said breathlessly. "What were you trying to ask me, Jem?" His eyes widened, his cheeks were flushed, whether from running or the cold air, she wasn't sure. He looked at her as if she was some bizarre plant that had sprung up on the spot, astonishing him. "Tessa, you followed me." "Of course I followed you. You ran off in the middle of a sentence." It wasn't a very good sentence. He looked down at the ground, and then up at her again, a smile, as familiar as her own memories, tugging at the corner of his mouth. It came back to her then, a memory lost but not forgotten. Jem's smile had always been like sunlight. "I never was the one who was good with words," he said. "If I had my violin, I would be able to play you what I wanted to say." "Just try." I'm not sure I can." I had 6 or 7 speeches prepared, and I was running through all of them, I think. His hands were stuffed deep into the pockets of his jeans. Tessa reached out and took him gently by the wrists. "Well, I am good with words," she said. "So let me ask you then." He drew his hands from his pockets and let her wrap her fingers around his wrists. They stood, Jem looking at her from under his dark hair. It had blown across his face in the wind off the river. There was still a single streak of silver in it, startling against the black. "You asked me if I have loved anyone but Will," she said. "And the answer is yes. I have loved you. I always have. And I always will." She heard his sharp intake of breath. There was a pulse pounding in his throat, visible under the pale skin, still laced with the fading white lines of the Brotherhood's runes. They say you cannot love two people equally at once, she said, and perhaps for others that is so. But you and Will, you are not like two ordinary people, two people who might have been jealous of each other, or who would have imagined my love for one of them diminished by my love of the other. You merged your souls when you were both children. I could not have loved Will so much if I had not loved you as well, and I could not love you as I do if I had not loved Will as I did. Her fingers ringed his wrists lightly, just below the cuffs of his jumper. To touch him like this, it was so strange, and yet it made her want to touch him more. She had almost forgotten how much she missed the touch of someone she loved. She forced herself to release her hold on him, though, and reached her hand into the collar of her shirt. Carefully, she took hold of the chain around her throat and lifted it so that he could see, dangling from it, the jade pendant he had given her so long ago. The inscription on the back still gleamed as if new. When two people are at one in their inmost hearts, they shatter even the strength of iron or bronze. You remember that you left it with me, she said. I have never taken it off. He closed his eyes. His lashes lay against his cheeks, long and fine. All these years, he said, and his voice was a low whisper, and it was not the voice of the boy he had been once, but it was still a voice she loved. All these years, you wore it. I never knew. It seemed that it would only have been a burden on you, when you were silent, brother. I feared you might think that my wearing it meant that I had some sort of expectation of you, an expectation that you could not fulfill. He was silent for a long time. Tessa could hear the lap of the river, the traffic in the distance. It seemed to her she could hear the clouds move across the sky. Every nerve in her body screamed for him to speak, but she waited as the expressions chased themselves across his face, and finally he spoke. To be a silent brother, he said, it is to see everything and nothing all at once. I could see the great map of life spread out before me. I could see the currents of the world. And human life began to seem a sort of passion play, acted at a distance. When they took the runes from me, and when the mantle of the Brotherhood was removed, it was as if I had woken from a long dream, or as if a shield of glass around me had shattered. I felt everything, all at once, rushing in upon me. All the humanity of the Brotherhood's spells had taken from me. That I had so much humanity to return to me. That is because of you. If I had not had you, Tessa, if I had not had these yearly meetings as my anchor and my guide, I do not know if I could have come back. There was light in his dark eyes now, and her heart soared in her chest. She had only ever loved two men in her life, and she had never thought to see either of their faces again. But you have, she whispered, and it is a miracle. And you remember what I once told you about miracles. He smiled again at that. One does not question miracles, or complain that they are not constructed perfectly to one's liking. I suppose that is true. I wish that I could have come back to you earlier. I wish I were the same boy I was when you loved me once. I fear that the years have changed me into someone else. Tessa searched his face with her eyes. In the distance, she could hear the sound of traffic passing, but here, by the river's edge, she could almost imagine that she was a girl again, and the air full of fog and smoke, the rattling sound of the railway in the distance. The years have changed me too, she said. I have been a mother and a grandmother, and I have seen those I love die, and seen others be born. You speak of the currents of the world, and I have seen them too. If I were still the same girl I was when you knew me first, I would not have been able to speak my heart as freely to you as I just have. I would not be able to ask you what I am about to ask you now. He brought his hand up and cupped her cheek. She could see the hope in his expression, slowly dawning. And what is that? Come with me, she said. Stay with me. Be with me. See everything with me. I have traveled the world, and seen so much, but there is so much more, and no one I would rather see it with than you. I would go everywhere and anywhere with you, Jem Carstairs." His thumb slid along the arch of her cheekbone. She shivered. It had been so long since someone had looked at her like that, as if she were the world's great marvel, and she knew she was looking at him like that too. "It seems unreal," he said huskily. "I've loved you for so long. How can this be true?" "It is one of the great truths of my life," Tessa said. "Will you come with me? For I cannot wait to share the world with you, Jem. There is so much to see." She was not sure who reached for who first, only that a moment later she was in his arms, and he was whispering, "Yes, of course, yes," against her hair. He sought her mouth tentatively. She could feel his gentle tension, the weight of so many years between their last kiss and this. She reached up, curling her hand around the back of his neck, drawing him down, whispering, "Bie Jiao Ji, don't worry, don't worry." She kissed his cheek, the edge of his mouth, and finally his mouth, the pressure of his lips on hers intense and glorious. And, oh, the beat of his heart, the taste of his mouth, the rhythm of his breath. Her senses blurred with memory. How thin he had been once, the feeling of his shoulder blades as sharp as knives beneath the fine linen of the shirts he had once worn. Now she could feel strong, solid muscle where she held him, the thrum of life through his body where it pressed against hers, the soft cotton of his jumper gripped between her fingers. Tessa was aware that above their small embankment people were still walking along Blackfriars Bridge. The traffic was still passing, and the passers-by were probably staring, but she didn't care. After enough years, you learned what was important and what wasn't, and this was important. Jem, the speed and stutter of his heart, the grace of his gentle hands, sliding to cup her face, his lips soft against hers as he traced the shape of her mouth with his, the warm, solid, definitive realness of him. For the first time, in many long years, she felt her heart open, and knew love as more than a memory. No. The last thing she cared about was whether people were staring at the boy and girl kissing by the river, as London, its cities and towers, and churches and bridges and streets, circled all about them like the memory of a dream. And if the Thames that ran beside them, sure and silver in the afternoon light, recalled a night long ago when the moon shone as brightly as a shilling on this same boy and girl, or if the stones of Blackfriars knew the tread of their feet and thought to themselves, "At last, the wheel comes full circle," they kept their silence.